Claire Weston signed the divorce papers with hands that didn't shake, at least not on the outside. The attorney across the desk shifted the final sheet toward her, but Claire didn't look up. Outside the Boston skyline, blurred behind floor-to-ceiling glass, the city lit in golds and whites, like it knew Christmas was coming but didn't care she was spending it alone. She pressed the pen down. One signature, then another. A breath she didn't know she'd been holding slipped out shaky and thin. The silence in the room felt padded, like someone had turned down the volume on life. Only the occasional scratch of the lawyer's pen broke through. "You'll receive the official notice by New Year's," the attorney said gently. "Anything else you need from us?" Claire looked at him and smiled the way she had trained herself to pleasant, polite, detached. "No, that's all." She stood clutching her coat tighter around her. Her phone buzzed a calendar alert. Appointment OB checkup, 3:30 p.m. She swiped it away without reading more. The attorney opened the door for her, murmured something kind and impersonal, and Claire stepped back into the world as a legally single woman. The air outside bit at her cheeks. Boston in December didn't offer sympathy. As she walked to the parking garage, she passed shops decorated with tinsel couples, arm-in-arm children staring at toy displays with open mouths and mittened fingers pressed to glass. Claire kept her gaze forward. She knew better than to look too long. Her SUV was cold. She turned on the ignition and rested both hands on the steering wheel. The heat would take a while. She opened her glove compartment and took out a small snow globe wrapped in a cloth napkin. Shaking it, she watched tiny flakes swirl around a miniature cottage tucked in a winter forest. It had belonged to her mother. Claire held it in her lap as she stared ahead. "I didn't think I'd be here," she whispered. There was no answer, of course. No response from the man she'd once believed would build a life with her. Miles Whitaker had promised her the world. Instead, he gave her silence. Their story had begun in neon-lit art galleries and rooftop bars, fast and dazzling, filled with champagne laughter and whispered dreams about starting something real. Miles had just launched his tech firm. She was painting children's illustrations and selling pieces on commission. They'd made promises under Christmas lights. 5 years later, he was building an empire in downtown Boston, and she hadn't touched a canvas in almost a year. It hadn't been one big fight. It had been 1,000 tiny nothings, missed dinners, cold replies, smiles that stopped reaching his eyes. The marriage faded slowly and efficiently, like something he had scheduled out of his calendar. The only thing Miles had ever been on time for was the divorce. Claire looked down at her stomach, cradling the small swell beneath her coat. He didn't know. She hadn't told him. Not after the way he'd signed the separation papers 6 weeks ago, without so much as asking why she'd been crying at the table. He hadn't asked about the doctor's bills. He hadn't even noticed the hospital wristband she'd forgotten to take off. She had convinced herself there was nothing to salvage. Until the test turned positive. Now everything was different, except it was too late. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was, "Anna, you okay? Want me to meet you at the clinic?" Claire didn't reply. Instead, she tossed the snow globe onto the passenger seat, turned the key, and pulled out onto the slick street. As she drove out of Boston, every building felt taller than her. Every lane marker stretched longer than she remembered. She drove north past exits and chain stores and gas stations glowing under fluorescent light. She didn't stop. Didn't turn around. She drove until the roads narrowed, the snow thickened, and the city faded behind her like a ghost. Burlington welcomed her the way New England towns do, quietly, modestly, without fanfare. A place where people shoveled their own driveways, where the air smelled like pine and wood smoke, where no one asked too many questions. She parked outside a small rental cottage Anna had helped her find through a friend of a friend. It was old, a little crooked, but clean and warm and waiting. The porch light was already on. Anna had thought of everything. Claire grabbed her overnight bag and stepped out slowly, her boots crunching into fresh snow. As she reached the front steps, she paused, looking out over the field of white behind the house. A single star hung low and bright in the sky. The air smelled like something new. Or maybe it was just emptiness. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Inside the cottage was simple 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, creaky floors, and a small box on the counter with a note in Anna's handwriting. "You're stronger than you think. Call me if anything happens early." Claire opened the fridge. Stocked, milk soup apples, bread, and a chocolate bar she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. She laughed softly, then cried a little as she made herself a cup of tea. The kettle screamed and steamed, and for a moment she just let it. Let it fill the room. Let it be the only sound. Later that night, as the snow thickened and the wind howled softly against the windows, Claire sat in the small bedroom, a wool blanket around her shoulders. She had unpacked only the essentials clothes, her sketchbook, the snow globe. She placed it on the nightstand. And then the first pain hit. It wasn't sharp, it was steady deep, the kind of pain that tells you this is really happening. She pressed her palm to her stomach and breathed. Another wave followed. Then another. By the time she dialed the number, her voice trembled. "Hi. I think it's time," she said, barely audible. 2 hours later, in a room lit by soft fluorescent light and the quiet beeping of machines, Claire held her daughter for the first time. Sophie. She was born at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Claire counted her fingers, counted her breaths, counted every second of the silence between them as Sophie blinked up at the world like it had no power to hurt her yet. The nurse adjusted Claire's pillow and whispered, "She's perfect." Claire nodded, unable to speak. She held her tighter. Snow fell quietly outside. Miles Whitaker would wake up tomorrow alone in a penthouse filled with awards and accolades, and he'd never know. But Claire knew. And in this small room, with her daughter wrapped in a red flannel blanket, Claire made a silent promise. She would never let Sophie feel the emptiness she had lived with for years. Not once. Not ever. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1. To let me know, if not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Christmas morning arrived without fanfare. No music, no wrapping paper, no tree. Just silent snow and a sleeping newborn in a hospital bassinet beside Claire's bed. The room was dim, the blinds drawn. A wreath hung on the wall across from her, probably meant to cheer patients, but it only reminded her of everything that wasn't happening today. Claire sat upright, back against the stiff pillow, staring at Sophie. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time her daughter stirred, she leaned over, checked her breathing, touched her tiny fingers. She was real. She was hers. But in the quiet, the question echoed. What now? There were no balloons, no phone calls, no proud father pacing the hallway. Just Claire and the slow, rhythmic beep of the machine monitoring her blood pressure. A soft knock tapped against the door. Claire tensed, eyes flicking up as it creaked open. A nurse peeked in, young, gentle, the kind with a voice always slightly too soft. "Good morning, Miss Weston," she whispered. "Can I come in?" Claire nodded. The nurse smiled as she stepped in, holding a clipboard and a small box. "Merry Christmas," Claire smiled back. "Is it?" The nurse chuckled kindly, then placed the box on the rolling table. "We put together something small for holiday births. Just a few things from the staff. A onesie, a blanket, and this. She held up a tiny stocking with Sophie's name stitched in red thread. Claire's eyes stung. Thank you. That's really kind. She's beautiful, the nurse said, gazing at Sophie. And you're doing great. I know it's not how you imagined today. Claire looked down at her hands. No, it's not. After a pause, the nurse lowered her voice. You don't have to be okay right away, you know. Some of the strongest women I've met cried the hardest their first night alone. Claire didn't answer. She just nodded, blinking fast. The nurse took the hint. I'll give you some space, but buzz if you need anything. When the door closed, Claire turned her attention back to Sophie. The baby was frowning in her sleep, one tiny fist curled under her chin. She reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a small notepad. On the first page, she wrote, December 25th. Your first Christmas. Just us. You slept for 3 hours straight and kicked off your socks twice. I've never loved anything more. Claire stared at the words. Then she tore the page out and tucked it into Sophie's stocking. By the time they were discharged that afternoon, snow was falling again. Anna had driven up early to meet them, her old Subaru rumbling in the parking lot, heat blasting. Claire walked slowly down the sidewalk, Sophie tucked in her arms, bundled in a flannel blanket. Anna jumped out of the car, arms outstretched. Let me see her. She's sleeping, Claire whispered. Anna's smile softened. Good. That means we did the blankets right. They got into the car carefully. Sophie didn't stir. Claire's hands didn't stop shaking until they were halfway home. The cottage looked smaller in the daylight. A single wreath hung on the door. Inside, the scent of cinnamon lingered. Anna must have baked something. Claire stepped in first and turned in a slow circle, taking it in. The wooden floors creaked, the couch sagged slightly, and the radiator hissed in the corner. But it was warm, safe, quiet. Home not yet, but maybe soon. Anna set down the baby bag and crossed her arms. So, you did it. I did. I would have been there, I know. Anna watched her for a beat. You want to talk about him? Claire didn't respond, just looked down at Sophie. That's what I thought, Anna said quietly. They moved around each other in silence for a while, Anna folding baby clothes, Claire placing bottles in the kitchen, unpacking formula, organizing things with robotic efficiency. Finally, Anna spoke again. Is he going to know? Claire froze. Anna didn't flinch. I'm not judging, I'm asking. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. He made his choice, but he didn't know. He didn't ask. Anna opened her mouth, then closed it again. She walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to watch the snow fall. After a long pause, she said, Sometimes men don't ask because they're afraid of the answer. Claire's voice cracked. He wasn't afraid. He was done. Anna turned softer now. I just don't want you waking up one day regretting the way this went. Claire looked up, her eyes glassy. I already regret all of it. But I won't let him break her. Not like he broke me. Silence stretched between them again. Finally, Anna reached out and squeezed Claire's arm gently. You don't have to decide anything today. I already did. That night when Anna left, the house felt heavier. Claire fed Sophie by the fire, whispering lullabies she barely remembered. Her voice cracked halfway through a verse. She stopped singing. You won't remember this, Claire whispered, brushing her daughter's cheek. But I will. The old snow globe sat on the windowsill. She'd placed it there earlier, watching the flakes swirl every time the radiator rattled. She stared at it now, heart aching, throat tight. Miles had once promised her a family. And now, he had everything but that. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then tapped open her old messages. His name was still saved as Miles, home. Claire hovered her thumb over it, For a second, she imagined it texting him a photo, a name, a line that would change everything. "She's here. You're a father." Her thumb trembled. Then she locked the phone and tossed it into the drawer. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." Sophie stirred a small whimper escaping her lips. Claire leaned down, scooped her up, held her tight. "I've got you," she whispered. "And that's enough. That has to be enough." She pressed her cheek to Sophie's forehead and closed her eyes. Outside, the snow fell quietly. Inside, the beginning of something fragile and brand new held its breath. The days blurred into one another, quiet and tender, wrapped in snow and the weight of starting over. Claire spent the first weeks in a fog of soft lullabies, diaper changes, middle-of-the-night feedings, and moments so still they felt like breathing underwater. Sophie was gentle, observant, and already stubborn in the most impossible ways, fighting sleep, unless Claire hummed the exact same melody, wrinkling her forehead in protest if the room was too bright or too quiet. Claire loved her fiercely. But love didn't pay rent. By mid-January, Claire sat cross-legged on the cottage floor, invoices spread around her like a paper storm. Her laptop screen glowed with a blinking cursor. She hadn't picked up a brush in months, but the bills didn't care. A message pinged from her inbox. Children's Publishing Network illustration opportunity. Urgent turnaround. She clicked. 10 pages. A winter-themed bedtime book. Soft pastels. Deadline in 2 weeks. Claire exhaled through her teeth and leaned back against the couch. Sophie was asleep in her bassinet, nearby arms splayed like tiny wings. She hadn't touched her sketchbook since the divorce, but her fingers itched. She reached for her pencil. Within minutes, shapes formed again, lines that turned into fur tails and snow-dusted hills. Her foxes were back. This time a baby fox nestled under its mother's paw, the forest around them blanketed in white. Claire paused, staring at the image. Something caught in her throat. She saved the file. A small flame lit inside her chest. Faint, but alive. The next day, Claire bundled Sophie and walked to the nearby co-op cafe Maple and Fern. Anna worked mornings there during the slow post-holiday season, managing the front counter and baking scones that always tasted like home. As Claire stepped in, a bell jingled. Warm air and the smell of cinnamon welcomed her. Locals sat with mugs in hand, snow melting off boots. A few looked up and smiled, recognizing her from around town. Anna waved from behind the counter. There she is, the tiny legend and her brilliant mom. Claire smiled. Someone's wide awake today. Anna peeked into the stroller and grinned. "Hi, Snow Angel." Sophie blinked, unimpressed. Claire stepped closer. "I took that book job." Anna's eyes lit up. "Yes, finally. It's about time the world got more of your forest animals." "It's only a few pages," Claire said, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Still. This is good. You need this." Claire looked around the cafe, how it buzzed with life, with people who had no idea she was rebuilding from nothing. It was comforting and distant, like living among shadows that never asked questions. Anna handed her a hot tea. "You okay? I think so. Yesterday was the first time I felt like myself again. See, I told you. You're rising." Slowly but definitely. Before Claire could respond, the cafe door opened again, letting in a gust of wind and a presence that sent a shiver down her spine. Miles Whitaker stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat, unaware of her completely. Claire froze. He hadn't changed much. Still tall, still put together in that effortless magazine-spread way. A long navy coat, black gloves, and that quiet intensity he always carried like armor. His eyes swept the cafe slowly, looking for someone, or maybe just taking it all in. Claire shrank closer to Sophie's stroller, heart pounding. Anna's brows lifted. Oh, he's not supposed to be here? He lives in Boston. Maybe just passing through. Claire couldn't look away. Miles stepped up to the counter, nodding politely at Anna. Just coffee. Black. Thanks. His voice, she hadn't heard it in over a year. And now here it was, cutting through the hum of conversation like the first drop of a storm. Claire grabbed her tea too tightly, the lid bending in under her fingers. Anna glanced toward her. You want to leave? Claire shook her head. She wasn't running anymore. She adjusted Sophie's blanket, took a slow breath, and waited. Miles turned, coffee in hand, surveying the cafe again, and then his eyes found her. It was instant. His whole body stilled. The cup in his hand paused halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face, not entirely, but just enough that she noticed. His eyes flicked to the stroller, then back to her. Claire braced herself. He didn't walk over, didn't wave. He simply stared. She held his gaze. 100 things passed between them in that silence. Regret, anger, shock, questions. Then he blinked, looked down at his coffee, and stepped out the door. Claire stood still for a long moment, waiting for the shaking in her legs to subside. Anna broke the silence. So, that happened. Claire's throat felt tight. I don't think he knew we were here. I don't think he knew about Sophie. No, Claire said softly. He didn't. Anna reached over and squeezed her arm. Well, he does now. Back at the cottage, Claire couldn't stop thinking about it. She lay Sophie in her bassinet and sat by the window watching snow tumble in slow motion against the gray sky. She didn't cry. Not yet. But the tension clung to her like wet wool. She picked up her phone, opened the contacts list. Miles's name still sat there, untouched, unchanged. Miles, home. She tapped it. Her thumb hovered over delete. She didn't. Instead, she went to her messages and opened a new draft. You saw us today. Delete. Yes, that was Sophie. Delete. You left before I could explain. Or maybe you didn't want to hear it. Delete. 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 She stared at the blank screen. Then she turned the phone off and set it face down on the table. The storm outside grew heavier. Wind curled around the corners of the house. Sophie stirred, let out a soft sigh in her sleep. Claire whispered to herself, almost too quiet to hear, I'm not ready. But the world was already moving, and Miles had seen them. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know, if not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The next morning arrived in pieces. Thin light slipping through the blinds, the low hum of the radiator, the soft murmur of Sophie stirring before dawn. Claire sat curled on the edge of her bed, her coffee cooling in her hands, heart heavy with the silence Miles had left behind. He hadn't called. He hadn't messaged. He'd walked out of that cafe like the last 6 years had never existed. Like Sophie didn't exist. The memory looped over and over his eyes, meeting hers, flicking to the stroller, then back again. That pause, that sharp inhale. And then the door closing behind him. Claire set her mug down too hard. Sophie let out a small cry from the bassinet. Claire crossed the room in 2 steps, scooping her up gently. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I've got you, she whispered. No matter what he does. I've got you. She carried Sophie to the living room, settling them both in the rocking chair near the window. Snow still blanketed the world in white. Outside, tire tracks sliced through the street like veins. Life was moving, whether she was ready or not. Anna showed up an hour later with a grocery bag in one hand and a look in her eye that Claire recognized immediately. "Oh no," Claire said, not even turning from the stove. "Oh yes," Anna replied, pulling off her gloves and setting the bag on the counter. "You think I'm letting you sit here stewing in emotional purgatory all day?" "Please." Claire tried to smile. "I'm fine." Anna raised a brow. "You saw the father of your child yesterday for the first time in nearly a year, and he saw your daughter for the first time ever. If you were fine, I'd be worried." Claire stirred the oatmeal on the stove. He didn't say a word. Not one. Maybe he was in shock. He walked out. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Claire's hands tightened around the wooden spoon. "What would you say, Anna, if you saw someone you once loved and suddenly realized they had a child who looked just like you?" Anna walked over, leaning against the counter. "I'd say something. Anything." Claire turned the stove off. The room filled with silence. Anna crossed her arms. "Are you going to tell him?" Claire stared at the wall, then turned to look at Sophie, who was swaddled on the couch, blinking up at the ceiling like she knew something was shifting. "I don't know. You should. It's not that simple." "Maybe it is." Claire turned sharply. "You didn't live it, Anna. You didn't live with someone who stopped looking at you like you were worth staying for, who chose meetings and airports and 5-year plans over being a husband. He disappeared before I ever left. I begged him to see me, and he never did. So no, it's not simple." Anna didn't flinch. "No, it's not. But it's still hers, her truth, her right to know who he is. And it's his right too, whether you like it or not." Claire swallowed hard. The words hung in the air like winter breath. Anna softened. "I'm not saying you have to forgive him, or let him in. But pretending none of it happened doesn't protect Sophie. It just delays the fallout." Claire sat down at the table, her fingers shaking as she pulled at the edge of her sweater sleeve. "He'll hurt her, like he hurt me." Or maybe Anna said gently, "He won't." The doorbell rang. Both women turned toward it. Claire blinked. "That can't be—" Anna raised an eyebrow. "Want me to get it?" Claire nodded. Anna walked to the door and pulled it open. Miles stood there. Not polished, not sharp, not like he had been at the cafe. His coat was dusted with snow, his hair slightly windblown. He looked human, tired, uncertain. "Hi," he said. Anna turned back toward Claire, her expression unreadable. "It's him." Claire stood slowly, heart hammering so loud she was sure he could hear it from the porch. She stepped toward the door. Miles met her eyes. His voice cracked. "I didn't know." Claire opened the screen door, but didn't invite him in. "I figured that out when you left without saying a word." He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair. "I was shocked. I saw her and Claire, she looks just like me. She is you." His face twisted. "How old is she?" Claire's hand tightened on the doorframe. "She was born the night I signed those papers." Miles staggered back half a step. "Christmas Eve." Claire nodded. "She's 6 weeks old," she said, each word heavy. 6 weeks you didn't call. 6 weeks you didn't check in. 6 weeks I've been learning how to do this alone." Miles' throat bobbed. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." They stared at each other, years of unsaid things pressing in between them like a third person. Finally, Miles spoke. "Can I see her?" Claire's jaw clenched. She looked back over her shoulder. Sophie was still swaddled, still watching the ceiling like nothing in the world had changed. Why, Miles blinked. "Because she's my daughter. Now she is," Claire snapped. After months of silence, after walking away from everything without a fight, I didn't know how to fight for something that felt already gone. Claire's voice dropped. "She wasn't gone. She was growing inside me while you were building your empire." "I made mistakes," Miles whispered. "I know that. But Claire, I want to make it right." Claire stared at him. The man who had once been everything. The man who had faded from her life, one absence at a time. And now he was back. "I don't know if I believe you," she said. "I don't blame you." Claire hesitated, then stepped aside. "1 minute," she said. "And you stay by the door." Miles nodded, stepping in slowly like the house might reject him. He looked at Sophie, really looked, and something in his face broke. His voice dropped to a whisper. She's perfect." Claire crossed her arms, guarding herself like armor. "You missed her birth. I know. You missed Christmas, her name, her first smile. I want to be there now." Claire didn't respond. Miles took a slow step forward, but didn't go near Sophie. He just stood there staring at the tiny miracle he never knew existed. Tears welled in his eyes. "I didn't come here to fix the past," he said, "but I'm here now, and I won't walk away again." Claire didn't know if she believed him, but she knew one thing. This right here was the moment everything changed. Miles stood still, like the floor might disappear beneath him if he breathed too loudly. Claire watched him from the other side of the room, arms folded back, straight heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The silence stretched thin between them, delicate and dangerous. Sophie shifted in her bassinet, one tiny hand lifting toward the ceiling, fingers curling in slow motion. A soft noise escaped her lips. Not quite a cry, just a sound of being alive. Miles didn't move. His voice came low, rough. "Does she know my name?" Claire's reply was immediate. "No." He nodded slowly, the weight of that sinking in. "Have you told anyone, Anna? That's it." He turned his face away and let out a breath. Then, after a moment, "She deserves to know who I am." "She deserves a lot of things," Claire said. A father who showed up before 6 weeks passed. A man who didn't have to see her face before remembering he had a wife once. A family. Miles looked at her, then really looked at her. She looked exhausted. Fierce. Beautiful in that way people only are when they've walked through fire and come out standing. "I didn't forget you," he said. Claire's eyes flashed. "Don't." "It's true. I never stopped thinking about you. I just didn't know how to fix it. And then, you were gone. You didn't look. I didn't know how." She stepped forward, then just enough to close the space between them by a few inches. "You were brilliant in boardrooms, Miles. You built an empire from a sketch on a napkin. Don't stand here and tell me you didn't know how to call your wife." He said nothing. Claire turned away before the tears surfaced. She hated that even now, even after everything part of her still wanted to believe him, still wanted him to fight, to be someone he wasn't 6 months ago. Someone better. Miles looked down at Sophie again. "What's she like?" Claire hesitated. Then slowly, "She likes light, hates cold bottles. She's quiet until she's not. She falls asleep to ocean sounds, not lullabies." His lips curved barely. "You played ocean sounds for her. I tried everything. That's what worked." "Of course it is." Claire met his eyes again. There it was, that flicker of the man she fell in love with. The one who used to wake her up just to watch the snow fall together, who once painted nursery walls in the middle of the night because he couldn't wait until morning. The man who disappeared inside deadlines and ambition and slowly forgot how to be human. Miles stepped back, pulled something from his coat pocket. A small envelope. "I wrote you something, weeks ago. I wasn't going to send it, but now..." Claire didn't reach for it. "What's in it?" He swallowed. "Everything I never said. Everything I should have said when we still had time." She let the silence hang between them again. Then she took the letter. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "I know." Claire folded the paper in half without opening it and set it on the kitchen table. Miles nodded. Can I come back tomorrow? No. He blinked. Claire, I need time. He nodded again. Quieter this time. Okay. She walked to the door and opened it. Snow had started falling again, soft and quiet. Miles stepped outside. He paused, once turned back toward her. I missed everything. Claire's voice cracked. Yes, you did. He held her gaze for one last moment, then turned and walked into the storm. The door closed gently behind him. Claire stood still, hand still on the handle, like if she moved too quickly something might break. Sophie let out a soft noise, a whimper that almost sounded like a question. Claire went to her, picked her up, and cradled her close. I don't know what happens next, she whispered, but I'll figure it out. I always do. She looked at the unopened letter on the table. She didn't read it. Not yet. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in the glow of the fireplace, Sophie dozing in the wrap against her chest. The wind tapped against the windows. The kettle clicked off, forgotten. She finally reached for the letter. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. She opened it slowly. The first line stopped her. Claire. I never learned how to be good at the quiet parts. The tears came fast and without warning. She folded the page shut before reading more. Later. She'd read the rest later. For now she pressed her lips to the top of Sophie's head and rocked gently in the firelight, whispering the only truth she was sure of. You are my beginning, not my mistake, and nothing will take that from us. The snow kept falling, and for the first time in weeks Claire didn't feel alone. Not entirely. Not yet whole but not shattered either. Something had shifted. And whatever came next, she wasn't afraid to meet it. Claire didn't read the letter again. Not that night, not the next morning, not even when Sophie napped long enough for the silence to stretch. It stayed on the kitchen table, neatly folded, anchored by a mug she hadn't washed yet. She told herself she was too tired, too busy, too focused on Sophie. But the truth was harder. She didn't know what she would do if it moved her. Worse, she didn't know what she would do if it didn't. By the end of the week, snow had piled knee-high along the cottage fence. Claire shoveled in short bursts, one eye on the monitor clipped to her coat, the other on the icicles dripping from the eaves. Sophie's schedule had started to settle into something predictable. Feedings every 3 hours, longer naps in the afternoons, soft smiles that flickered without warning. Claire lived for those smiles. They reminded her there was something still beautiful in this world, something untouched by all the pain. And yet every quiet moment left too much room to think. When Anna showed up Saturday afternoon with a thermos of lentil soup and 2 almond scones, Claire didn't even pretend to resist. You look like a woman who's been ghosted by her own brain, Anna said, toeing off her boots. Claire dropped onto the couch. I think I forgot what sleep is. Anna handed her the soup. That's not what I meant. Claire stared into the steam, not answering. Anna sat beside her, pulling her legs up under a blanket. Have you heard from him? Claire shook her head. No. He said he wouldn't come back unless I asked him to. Anna studied her face. And are you going to? Claire didn't look up. I don't know. That's not a no, it's not a yes either. Anna waited, then gently nudged. You read it. Claire reached over to the table, tapped the edge of the folded paper. Still there, Anna raised an eyebrow. You're treating it like it's radioactive. Claire smiled faintly. Maybe it is. They sat in silence for a while, the soup growing cold in Claire's hands. The fire crackled, filling the space between unspoken things. Anna spoke softly. You loved him. Claire closed her eyes. I still do. Sometimes. And sometimes I don't know who he even is. You don't have to know that yet. I think I do. Claire looked at her. I'm not trying to figure out if he still fits into my life. I'm trying to figure out if I should let him anywhere near hers. Before Anna could respond, Sophie's soft cry floated in from the baby monitor. Claire stood automatically. I'll get her. In Sophie's room, warm and dim, Claire leaned over the crib and scooped her up. Sophie's face was scrunched, the start of a real cry building in her throat, but she quieted as soon as she was in her mother's arms. Hey, sweet girl, Claire, whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's temple. It's okay. I'm right here. She sat in the rocker, holding Sophie close, gently swaying. Her mind wandered where it didn't want to go back to Miles, to the way he'd looked at their daughter like she was a miracle he'd never dared hope for. Claire hadn't been prepared for that look. She hadn't been prepared for any of it. Later that night, after Anna left and Sophie was finally sleeping again, Claire stood alone in the kitchen staring at the letter. She picked it up, unfolded it, read the first paragraph, then the next. By the third, she was crying. Not the kind of crying that gasps or shakes, just a slow, steady stream of tears that made no sound. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if it might stop her heart from doing what it was doing, breaking and hoping all at once. The letter wasn't poetic. It wasn't grand. It was real, messy, honest. He'd admitted everything. The tunnel vision, the pride, the fear that she would leave, and his decision to act like it wouldn't matter if she did. He had written, I thought I had more time to fix it. I didn't know the clock was already running out. And at the end, if I'm too late, I'll understand. But if there's still a corner of you that believes in what we were, I'll be wherever you say. Waiting. Claire folded the letter again, pressed it to her lips, and exhaled. The next morning, the knock at the door came early. Claire stood barefoot in the kitchen, Sophie on her hip cereal cooling in a bowl she hadn't touched. The knock came again, gentle, hesitant. She already knew it was him. Claire opened the door and didn't speak. Miles stood there, hands in his pockets, the same look in his eyes he'd had the day they first met. That strange, careful hopefulness, like he already expected the answer to be no, but was going to ask anyway. I wasn't going to come, he said quietly. But I woke up thinking about her. And I couldn't stay away. Claire didn't move. Miles glanced down at Sophie, who stared back at him, blinking. I brought something, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a snow globe. Not the one from their apartment. This one was new, handmade, clearly. Inside, a tiny mother fox curled around a baby in a snowy forest clearing. Claire gasped softly. She's the fox, Miles said, just like your sketches. Claire blinked fast. How did you... I still follow your art page. You haven't updated in forever, but I remembered the winter foxes. I found someone local who makes custom ones. He held it out. Claire took it slowly, like it might melt. You don't get to fix this with a snow globe, she said. I know. But it's beautiful. He looked at her. So is she. Claire swallowed. Why now, Miles? Why come back now? His answer was immediate. Because I couldn't breathe knowing she existed and I wasn't part of her world. And because I think maybe I never stopped loving you, even when I forgot how to show it. Claire felt the tears rise again. She didn't cry. Not yet. She stepped back, opened the door a little wider. Come in, she said softly. But this isn't a promise, it's just space. Miles nodded, stepping into the warmth, into the scent of home and oatmeal and the quiet sound of a baby breathing. And for the first time in a very long time, Claire didn't feel like the only adult in the room carrying the weight of a family. She didn't let go of Sophie. But she let go of something else. Just enough to begin. Miles didn't sit right away. He stepped into the living room like it was sacred ground, unsure of where to place his hands, how loud to breathe, or whether he even belonged here. Claire watched him from the doorway, Sophie nestled against her chest, both of them wrapped in the quiet tension that hung between forgiveness and something still unnamed. The snow globe sat on the windowsill, now catching the morning light. The tiny foxes inside shimmered as snowflakes swirled around them. Claire had placed it there without thinking. But now she saw it clearly. It was a symbol of what was broken, of what might be rebuilt. Miles followed her gaze. She smiled when she saw it. He said, eyes flicking to Sophie. She smiles at ceiling fans too. He smiled, but it faded fast. Still, I'll take what I can get. Claire nodded toward the couch. You can sit. He obeyed carefully, like his body wasn't sure it had the right to touch their world. She sat across from him, shifting Sophie in her arms. The baby stirred, yawned, then curled tighter against her mother's shoulder, completely unaware of the storm still passing around her. You said you still follow my art page, Claire said, voice low. Miles looked down at his hands. Every week. Even when you stopped posting, I kept checking. I missed your sketches. They always made things feel softer. Claire blinked slowly. You didn't reach out. I didn't know how to without making it worse. And now you do. He looked up. No. But I realized silence doesn't fix anything either. Claire let that sit. Then she has your eyes. Miles's throat moved. I saw that. First thing I saw, actually. Mine don't change color with the weather. He laughed softly. Neither do mine. They've always just shifted. Claire didn't smile. She was watching him too closely. You used to say my art taught you how to see, she whispered. Now I wonder if you only looked when it was beautiful. His face broke then, just slightly, just enough. I didn't leave because of the ugly parts, Claire. I left because I didn't know how to stay when I felt like I was failing you. You stopped talking to me. You built a life around being gone. I thought I was building a future. You were disappearing into one. Silence. Sophie stirred. Miles looked at her again, his whole face softening. Can I hold her? Claire hesitated, then nodded. She stood slowly, careful not to jostle the baby, and crossed the room. When she placed Sophie in Miles's arms, their fingers brushed, and something in the air shifted. He looked terrified. She watched every movement, how he cradled her head, how he adjusted her blanket, how he stared like he was looking at something both too fragile and too precious to name. Hi, he whispered, voice cracking. Hi, little one. Sophie blinked, then gave a drowsy sigh. I'm your dad, he said. And I'm sorry I wasn't here when I should have been. Claire sat down again, her hands trembling slightly. You look natural with her, she murmured. I feel like I'm holding the whole world. You are. He glanced at her. You did it alone. I had Anna. That doesn't make it less alone. She didn't reply. Miles swallowed hard. I'm not asking you to forget what I did, or what I didn't do. I just want to know if there's space. For me. For us. Eventually. Claire pressed her fingers to her lips. She wasn't ready for this part. Not the second chances. Not the hope. I don't know, she said honestly. Right now I'm still remembering how to trust the silence again. Miles looked confused. The silence, he asked. She nodded. The part between the noise. The part where no one's arguing but no one's connecting either. You used to fill it with work. Deadlines. Missed dinners. I filled it with waiting. He nodded slowly, absorbing every word like it hurt to hear, but mattered too much to interrupt. Now she continued, I want to fill the silence with things that matter. Real things. Sophie. Honest conversations. Healing. Not pretending like time erased everything. Miles looked down at Sophie. So what does that mean for me? Claire took a long breath. You can see her, but not on your schedule. On mine. You come when I say, you leave when I say, you earn her miles. He nodded. Okay, and you don't get to talk about the past like it's some puzzle we can glue back together. He nodded again. Okay. Claire watched him hold their daughter, his thumb brushing against her tiny fingers, awe in every breath. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly, eyes still on Sophie. Claire didn't respond. After a moment, she stood and gently lifted Sophie back into her arms. Miles let go slowly, reluctantly, his eyes never leaving her face. Claire rocked the baby gently. You say you love me now, but I need to see what you do with that. Miles looked at her. No bravado, no performance, just a man waiting to be allowed back into something he once destroyed. I'll be here, he said. For now, Claire said softly. That's enough. And as she walked down the hallway, Sophie curled against her chest. The snow globe on the windowsill caught a beam of sun and scattered light across the walls. Something was mending. Not fixed, not whole, but no longer broken. Claire stood at the sink sleeves pushed to her elbows, warm water running over Sophie's bottles. Outside, winter had begun to thaw. Small streams of melted snow trailed down the porch steps, and the sun felt stronger than it had in weeks. It wasn't spring yet, not really, but something had shifted, the kind of shift you feel before you see. Behind her, laughter bubbled from the living room. Miles. He was on the floor, Sophie on a blanket beside him, waving her arms like she was conducting a tiny, invisible orchestra. Miles mimicked her movements, wide-eyed and dramatic, earning a delighted squeal from their daughter. Claire watched quietly from the kitchen doorway, a dish rag in hand. It had been 3 weeks since that morning she let him back in. Not fully just the edge of the door, just enough space to see what he would do with it. And Miles had shown up. Consistently. Quietly. With no expectations. He never stayed long. He never asked for more. He simply came sometimes with groceries, sometimes with a children's book he thought Sophie might like once, with a hand-built wooden rattle he'd clearly spent too long sanding smooth. He was learning her. And somehow Claire was learning him again, too. You ever get tired of making animal noises? She asked, now stepping into the room. Miles looked up, grinning. She's a demanding audience. Claire smiled, lowering herself onto the couch. You do a pretty convincing sheep. Years of practice. Sophie let out a hiccup, then blinked up at her father with that quiet curiosity Claire had started calling her detective face, like she was storing every expression, every sound for future decoding. Miles leaned back against the couch, brushing his fingers gently against Sophie's blanket. I was thinking, he said, after a moment, maybe I could take her for a walk sometime. Just around the block. Give you an hour to breathe. Claire stilled. He must have felt it because he didn't look at her. Only if you're ready, no pressure. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to trust this version of him, the one who showed up without being asked, who looked at Sophie like she was sacred, not an obligation. But trust wasn't a switch. It was a door with 1,000 locks. Claire spoke slowly. I need to be close, and it can't be long. Miles nodded. Of course. And I'm not handing her over until I see how you strap her into the stroller. He grinned, something warm and almost boyish flickering across his face. Fair enough. Claire leaned her head back, closing her eyes for a moment. She didn't realize how tired she was until she stopped moving. You can nap, Miles said quietly. I've got her. Her instinct was to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she opened one eye and said, Just 10 minutes. I'll count everyone." When she woke, the living room was filled with soft humming. Claire blinked, disoriented. The fireplace crackled. Sophie was still in the living room, snug in her bassinet. And Miles, he was sitting beside her, softly singing a lullaby Claire hadn't heard in years. A lump rose in her throat. She hadn't told him that song, hadn't told him how her mother used to sing it when storms shook the windows at night. He didn't see her watching. He just kept humming gently, rocking the bassinet with one hand, his eyes on Sophie like she was the most important story he'd ever been asked to read. When the last note faded, Claire sat up. "You sang that right." Miles startled slightly, then smiled. "She likes it." Her eyes flutter every time. Claire stood crossing the room. "Where'd you hear that one? You used to hum it," he said. "Back when we still lived in the old apartment. I'd hear it through the wall when you painted." Claire stared at him, something fragile stirring inside her. "I thought you were always on calls," she said. "I was," he replied, "but I always listened for you." She sat down beside the bassinet, reaching in to stroke Sophie's tiny hand. "She'll grow fast," Miles said softly. "We'll blink and she'll be walking." "I know. I want to be there when that happens." Claire met his gaze. "Then stay." The word hung in the air. Not a command, not even a promise, just space. Miles nodded once. "I will." He stood and reached for his coat. "I'll give you 2 the rest of the afternoon," he said. "Same time tomorrow?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He stepped to the door, then turned back. "Claire." She looked up. "Thank you. For letting me be here. For not slamming the door shut." She almost smiled. "You're not in yet, I know," he said. "But I'm still knocking?" She closed the door after him and stood there, fingers resting on the frame. Outside, the snow was starting to melt in patches, revealing the earth beneath. Soft, dark soil, ready for something new. Claire turned back to Sophie, scooped her up gently and pressed her close. "You've got his eyelashes," she whispered, "but we'll work on the rest together." And just like that, the silence of the house didn't feel so heavy anymore. Not empty. Just waiting. The following Tuesday started with sun on the snow and the smell of banana bread warming in the oven. Claire moved through the kitchen with one eye on Sophie in her baby seat, and the other on the recipe card smudged with years of flour fingerprints. It was her mother's handwriting, uneven, and all caps the way she'd always written recipes and Christmas cards. Sophie babbled softly, waving one sock-covered foot in protest. Claire smiled. "I know you hate the straps. Just a few more minutes, okay?" A knock broke the calm. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Miles holding a small pot of lavender in one hand and a sheepish smile in the other. "I didn't know if you liked flowers. Figured plants are less pressure." Claire blinked. "It's alive, for now," he said. "If you water it." She took it from him carefully. "Thank you." Miles stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. He looked around the same way he always did, like the house might have changed overnight. Or maybe he just liked seeing it still here, like he was still allowed in. "Smells like banana bread," he said. "My mom's recipe?" He softened. "She made that the first time I came over for dinner." Claire turned to put the plant on the windowsill. "You remembered." "I remember everything about that night, especially how I dropped half a slice on my lap and tried to hide it under the tablecloth." Claire laughed. "You thought you were so smooth. I was 25 and terrified of impressing your mother. I think I wiped my hands on a linen napkin and pretended it was normal. You called her ma'am twice in one sentence." Miles grinned. She didn't let me forget it. For a moment, the memory stretched between them like a bridge, fragile, familiar. The kind of memory that sneaks up and reminds you what used to be real. Claire cleared her throat. Coffee? He nodded. Always. She poured 2 mugs and handed him one, then leaned against the counter, her body relaxed, but her eyes alert. Miles glanced at Sophie, who was busy chewing the ear of her stuffed bunny. She's growing, he said quietly. Every time I see her, she's different. She rolled over yesterday, Claire said. He froze. She did, twice, and then cried like she surprised herself. I wish I'd seen that. Claire looked at him. You're seeing everything else? He nodded, swallowing hard. That matters, it does. They sat on the couch again, coffee cooling between sips. Sophie let out a small coo, then a yawn so wide it made Miles chuckle. Can I take her for that walk today? He asked, voice gentle. Claire looked out the window. The path was mostly clear, slushy at the corners. The stroller was by the door. She hesitated. Her arms twitched with instinct. I'll come with you, she said. His eyes lit up, but he didn't press. Okay. It wasn't a long walk. Down the winding road past Maple and Fern, across the wooden bridge that overlooked the frozen creek, then back up the hill toward the cottage. Claire pushed the stroller most of the way. Miles stayed close beside them, hands in his pockets, gaze flicking from Sophie to the snowbanks to Claire's face when he thought she wouldn't notice. At the bridge, she stopped. Sophie had fallen asleep, pacifier dangling loose at the edge of her lips. Claire looked out at the water, a narrow ribbon of gray beneath the ice. We walked here after our first fight. Miles smiled faintly. Yeah, I remember. You wore that ridiculous green scarf I told you looked like seaweed. I still have it. She glanced at him. Seriously, it's in a drawer somewhere. I kept it because, I don't know. You laughed that day, even after we argued. That laugh saved the rest of it. Claire nodded slowly. I wanted things to be simple back then. I made them complicated. You disappeared into what you thought love should look like. Providing. Planning. Winning. I thought if I could build us a perfect future, the present would take care of itself. Claire turned to him fully now. But I didn't need a perfect future, Miles. I needed you when I couldn't sleep, when I couldn't stop crying, when I was scared I'd lose the baby. I needed you when it was hard, not when it was already solved. His expression cracked. I know. And I'm sorry. Every day. They stood in the cold, breath-visible wind curling between them. Claire reached down and adjusted Sophie's blanket fingers, trembling. I don't want to raise her on pain, she said. I don't want her first story to be that her dad had to earn his way back in because he forgot how to love us right. Miles stepped closer slowly. Then let's write her a better story. Claire looked at him, really looked at him. He was different now. Softer. Not polished, not performative. Just real. I'm not ready to say yes, she said. But I'm not saying no. He nodded, accepting the weight of it. As they walked back, Claire noticed something. For the first time, they moved in sync. Steps matched silences, shared glances that didn't need words. They reached the cottage just as Sophie stirred. Claire lifted her out of the stroller and into her arms. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's cheek. Do you want to come in? She asked Miles, voice low. He looked at her. Only if you want me to. Claire opened the door, and this time she didn't just leave it cracked. She held it open long enough for him to step fully inside. Claire sat at the dining table sketchbook, open pencil in hand, but the page remained blank. She glanced at the baby monitor beside her. Sophie was napping upstairs, soft breaths rising and falling in a rhythm Claire had memorized. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that made thoughts echo louder. Miles had been coming by more often, helping, listening, holding Sophie like she was made of breath and starlight. He was trying. But Claire didn't know what to do with a man who had learned how to be present only after everything had already fallen apart. Her pencil touched the paper just lightly enough to leave a line. A fox again. Small. Curled tight around something invisible. She paused, then drew a second one beside it, taller, watchful eyes wide open. Not touching. Just close. The knock came just as she finished the eyes. Claire closed the sketchbook, set her pencil down, and moved to the door. Miles stood there holding a takeout bag and a hesitant smile. "I thought maybe you hadn't eaten," he said. "And Anna swears this place downtown does the best butternut squash soup outside of Manhattan." Claire arched a brow. "That's a bold claim. She said it with her hands on her hips, so I believed her." Claire stepped back to let him in. "We'll see." They sat at the table, soup steaming between them, snow tapping against the window panes. It was one of those late winter days where everything felt heavy, and waiting like the season was holding its breath before deciding whether to thaw or stay frozen just a little longer. "You've been quiet lately," Miles said, tearing a piece of bread. Claire stirred her soup. "I've been thinking." "About," she hesitated, then looked up. "About what this looks like. Us. Her. You being here." Miles nodded slowly. "Okay. And I don't want this to feel like convenience." He frowned. "It doesn't. I'm not saying it does now. I'm saying it could. You get to show up after the storm's passed, after the worst nights, after the loneliness." His voice dropped. "That's not what this is. I know you believe that. But I have to say it anyway." He set the bread down. "Claire, I'm not here to fix what's already gone. I'm here because I can't imagine not being part of what's next." Claire's breath caught. And before she could reply, Sophie let out a cry upstairs. Claire stood. "I'll get her." Miles followed her gaze. "Can I?" She looked at him, uncertain for a moment, then nodded. Miles moved up the stairs with practiced care. Claire stood frozen at the bottom, listening. There was a long silence, and then his voice, soft, low, warm. Hey, you're okay, little one." The crying stopped. Claire pressed her hand to the banister. When Miles came back down, Sophie was tucked against his chest, tiny fingers gripping his shirt collar. Claire exhaled slowly. "She likes you. She doesn't know what I've done. She will someday." Miles met her eyes. "And I'll tell her. All of it. No excuses." Claire watched them, father and daughter, and felt something inside her shift again. Not quite forgiveness, not yet. But something. That night after Sophie was asleep again, and the dishes were done, Miles lingered near the door. "There's something I want to ask," he said. Claire looked up, guarded. "Okay. There's a fundraiser next weekend, for the community library. I was invited. And I'd like to take you." Her heart jumped. Like a date, like a step, just a step. She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for people to see us as anything. They don't have to see anything. Just two people supporting a cause." Claire's mind raced. The idea of being seen with him again, of facing the whispers, the glances, the assumptions. "I'll think about it," she said. Miles smiled and nodded. "That's enough." He left a few minutes later, the scent of soup and baby shampoo still hanging in the air. Claire stood at the window watching him walk down the path, his shoulders hunched against the cold. She didn't know what she was more afraid of letting him back in, or how much she already had. Upstairs, Sophie stirred. Claire climbed the stairs, heart full of noise, and leaned over her daughter's crib. "Love isn't just showing up," she whispered. "It's staying when it's hard." And tonight, Miles had stayed. The dress was simple. Soft navy blue, long sleeves fitted at the waist. Claire stood in front of the mirror, unsure if it still looked like her. It had been so long since she'd worn anything that wasn't built for nursing errands or comfort. Anna stepped into the room behind her carrying a tiny silver necklace. "You look beautiful," she said, clipping it behind Claire's neck. Claire gave her a sideways look. "Too much," Anna shook her head. "Just enough. And anyway, it's not about them, it's about you." Claire turned, slightly smoothing the fabric over her stomach. "I'm not sure what I'm doing, Anna." "Yes, you are. You're choosing to be seen again. That's brave." Claire looked back at her reflection. Or foolish. "You were always both." Anna smiled. Then her tone softened. "But tonight you're not doing it alone. The library fundraiser was hosted at the town's historic inn, all-weathered brick and glowing windows, wrapped in string lights and local pride. Miles waited by the door when Claire and Anna arrived, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning every car that pulled up. When he spotted Claire, something in his posture shifted, less nerves, more awe. Claire stepped out slowly. Miles blinked. "Wow," he breathed. She tilted her head. "Good wow, or library-appropriate wow, every kind of wow." She laughed, quiet and unsure, but it stayed with her as they walked inside. The inn was crowded but warm. People they hadn't seen in months greeted them with polite smiles and double takes. Claire could feel the hush behind the looks, curiosity, surprise, maybe even judgment. She tightened her grip on her clutch. Miles leaned in. "We don't have to stay long. 1 lap, 1 drink, 1 donation." She nodded. "Deal." They drifted between tables, accepting compliments, answering gentle questions and dodging the more pointed ones. Claire could feel her guard inching higher with every step. She hated how small it made her feel. Halfway through the evening, Miles gently guided her to a quiet corner near the old fireplace. "You okay?" She gave him a half smile. "This was a lot." "I know," he paused. "But I'm proud of you." Her chest tightened. "Don't say that like I've already accomplished something. I'm saying it because you're here. That matters." She looked at him, eyes searching. "Does it? Yes. It matters to me." The music shifted to a softer tune piano and cello blending like falling snow. Miles held out a hand. Claire hesitated. "Miles." "1 dance," he said. "No one else. Just us." She stared at his hand for a long moment, then took it. The floor wasn't crowded, which helped. He pulled her gently into him, one hand at her waist, the other cradling her fingers. The smell of his cologne, faint familiar, wrapped around her like memory. They moved slowly, quietly. Miles leaned close. "You used to hum this song in the kitchen?" Claire's breath caught. "I don't remember." "I do." She rested her cheek briefly against his shoulder, only for a second. It was just enough. And then a voice interrupted them. "Well, this is something," came a woman's voice behind them. Claire turned. Madeline Halvers, mayor's wife, a woman who always spoke like she was threading a needle through gossip. "I almost didn't recognize you," Madeline said, lips pulled tight. "You've been quite the mystery these days." Claire straightened, just focusing on Sophie. Madeline's eyes flicked to Miles. And Miles, back in the picture. How lovely. Claire forced a smile. "We're taking things slow." "Oh, of course. But you know some doors once closed." Miles's jaw tightened. Claire took his arm. "We'll let you enjoy your evening, Madeline." They walked away without waiting for a response. Once outside, the cold hit hard. Claire exhaled into it like she was purging the weight of the room. "I'm sorry," Miles said. "We shouldn't have come." "No," Claire said. "I needed to see. See what that I'm not her anymore." The woman who stayed quiet when people talked like that. The woman who let other people decide the shape of her life. Miles turned toward her. You were never that woman. I was, but not tonight. She stepped forward, breath visible between them. Miles, I don't need perfection from you. I don't even need certainty. I just need honesty. Realness. I need to know if this version of you, the one who shows up, listens, dances in a crowded room, isn't just a phase. His voice was steady. It's not. She looked at him hard. Then show me. Not just tonight. Not when it's easy. Show me in the quiet. The tired mornings, the hard talks. He took her hand. I will. And for the first time, Claire believed him, not because he promised, but because he already was. The next morning, the sky was pale with frost. Thin sunlight streamed through the cottage windows, pooling on the hardwood floors like quiet promises. Claire stood in the nursery arms, wrapped around herself, watching Sophie sleep in the early light. She didn't hear Miles come in at first. Hey, he said softly, careful not to startle her. Claire turned, offering a small smile. She's still out cold. He stepped closer, glancing into the crib. She sleeps like you, flat on her back, arms out like she owns the world. Claire chuckled under her breath. She'll need that kind of confidence. There was a pause, comfortable but charged. The kind of silence that suggested something unsaid was pressing against the walls. I've been thinking, Miles said finally. Claire raised an eyebrow. That's dangerous. He smiled, then sobered. About Vermont. About staying. Claire's breath caught. You mean, permanently? He nodded. I've been talking to a few people. There's a local startup that's building educational tech for remote schools. They're small but promising, and they want someone who knows product development. She blinked, trying to process. You'd work here, I'd live here. Claire looked away. Her heart was thudding fast and uneven. It's not just about being close to Sophie, he added, stepping gently toward her. It's about being where I want to build something again. With intention. With you, if that's still something we can explore. Claire's eyes shimmered. That's a big shift. I know. I used to think being successful meant scaling everything: business, income, reputation. But lately, success feels like this. He gestured softly at the crib at her. Quiet mornings, coffee in mismatched mugs, knowing I'm where I'm supposed to be. Claire swallowed hard. And if things don't go perfectly, he smiled faintly, then we figure it out. Together. A part of her wanted to believe. Another part was still afraid. Not of him, of herself, of hoping. I need time, she said. I'll take whatever you give me. They stood there for a moment, Sophie's gentle breathing the only sound between them. Later that afternoon, Claire stopped by Anna's bakery, hoping for advice, or at least a distraction. The scent of cinnamon and yeast wrapped around her like comfort. Anna handed her a mug of chai without needing to ask. You look like a woman with questions. I feel like a woman with a storm inside. Anna wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter. Talk. Claire hesitated, then exhaled. He wants to stay. He's looking for work here. Real work. He says this place feels like home now. Anna's eyes softened. And what does that feel like to you? Overwhelming? Like we might actually be getting close to something real? Anna leaned in. Claire, you left a life that broke you. You built a new one from scratch with a baby in your arms. Don't downplay how much strength that takes. Claire's throat tightened. I'm scared to need him. It's okay to be scared, but needing someone doesn't make you weak. Trusting again, that's the bravest thing of all. Claire nodded slowly. I want to believe this is different. Then let it be. On your terms. That evening, Claire found herself on the porch, wrapped in a knit shawl, the air crisp against her cheeks. Miles arrived just after sunset, hands in his coat pockets, breath fogging in front of him. "Walk?" he asked. She nodded. They took the trail behind the cottage where the snow had melted enough to reveal patches of pine needles and damp earth. Sophie was with Anna for the night, a test run Claire had called it, though it felt more like letting go of one of her last lines of defense. As they walked, Miles looked over. "There's something else I want to show you." Claire hesitated. "What is it?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered journal. "My therapist told me to write everything down. Every time I thought about you or Sophie, every regret, every plan, every truth I was afraid to say out loud." He handed it to her. Claire held it like it might break. "You don't have to read it now," he said quickly. "Or ever. But I want you to have it." She stared at the journal, her heart thudding. "Miles, this is more than I expected. It's everything I didn't say when I should have." Claire clutched it to her chest. They reached the old bridge at the bend of the trail, the one where they'd argued months ago, and then found silence that wasn't distance, but clarity. She turned to him. "If we do this," she said quietly, "it can't be built on promises alone. I need your patience, your honesty, your willingness to rebuild from the ashes, not from memory. You have all of it." Claire took a breath, then placed her hand in his. It was small, but real. And this time, she didn't pull away. Claire read the journal that night. The house was quiet except for the hum of the baby monitor and the soft creak of winter wind against the siding. She sat curled on the couch, legs tucked beneath her blanket, draped over her shoulders, Miles' handwriting in her lap. It wasn't perfect prose. Some pages were rambling. Some were angry, scribbled like he had to get the words out before he lost his nerve. Others were so quiet it felt like reading someone's breath. But it was real, and that made it almost unbearable. He'd written about the night Sophie was born, how he stood outside the hospital chapel, hands shaking, praying for forgiveness, but unsure if he deserved it. He wrote about the silence in their old house, the way her laugh had disappeared months before she ever packed a bag, the way he hadn't known how to fix it, so he'd buried himself in deadlines believing time would heal what his presence couldn't. He'd written about his father too, how he'd modeled love as provision, not connection, how he thought showing up with solutions was better than showing up with presence. Claire closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. She cried, not because it was sad, but because it was honest, and that kind of honesty was rare. The next morning she stood at the sink, washing bottles, when Miles knocked on the back door. He looked hesitant, like he didn't know if he should be there. Claire opened the door and stepped aside wordlessly. He followed her in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "You read it?" he asked. She nodded. "I did." And Claire looked at him, eyes still damp but steady. "You told me once that love isn't about showing up when it's easy. That stayed with me." Miles tucked his hands into his coat pockets. "It's the only truth I know." She took a breath. "Then let's talk about what showing up looks like. Long term." He blinked. "You mean—" "I mean a schedule," she said, half smiling. "Shared responsibilities. You helping with daycare pickups, doctor's visits, groceries, all of it." Miles nodded slowly at first, then with more certainty. "Yes, whatever you need." Claire turned to the fridge and pulled down a notepad. "We're starting small. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You pick Sophie up at 4. You stay for dinner on Wednesdays. You help with bath time." He smiled like a man who'd just been given keys to something sacred. "And if you miss any of it, I won't." Claire arched a brow. "Miles." He exhaled. If I miss any of it, I tell you why. No disappearing. No excuses. Just truth. Good, she said, scribbling on the pad. We'll build from there. They moved into the routine, like learning a dance they once forgot. Sophie adjusted quickly, her giggles filling the spaces that once held tension. On Wednesdays, Claire cooked while Miles fed Sophie, and laughter replaced silence. On Fridays, they watched old movies with the baby asleep on Miles's chest. Still, it wasn't always easy. There were nights Claire lay awake, wondering if trusting again was foolish, and there were moments Miles would pause mid-sentence, unsure if he had the right to speak at all. But the difference now was that they talked through it. One evening, 3 weeks into the new rhythm, Claire found herself sitting beside Miles on the couch after Sophie had gone down. The fireplace crackled low, and a mug of tea warmed her hands. I got a job offer, Miles said suddenly. Claire turned to him, heart jumping. Here, he nodded. The local startup I mentioned. They want me to come on as head of product. Her eyes widened. That's amazing. It is. And it's not remote. It's here. Full-time. She blinked, letting it sink in. I'd have to move into town properly, he added. Get a place close by. I'd still give you space, of course, but it'd be permanent. Claire set her mug down. Is that what you want? I want a life with Sophie. And if you'll let me, I want one with you too. But I'll take whatever piece you offer. She searched his face. The Miles she once married would have delivered that line like a pitch confident rehearsed, smiling through the fear. This Miles said it with no shield. Just truth. I think I'm ready for you to move closer, Claire said softly. He exhaled deeply. You sure I am? They sat in silence for a while, letting the moment settle. Then Claire said something that surprised even her. I still have the divorce papers. Miles looked over, caught off guard. I keep them in a drawer, she continued. Not because I want them, but because they remind me of how far we fell, of how fragile love is when you stop tending to it. Miles was quiet, listening. I think she said slowly that it's time I let them go. His voice broke slightly. Claire, she reached for his hand. Not as a promise, but as a sign that I believe people can change, that I believe you have. He held her gaze. I won't give you a reason to doubt it. She smiled faintly. Let's just keep showing up. One day at a time. And as snow began to fall outside the window again, Claire knew she wasn't rebuilding what once was. She was building something entirely new. The late March air smelled like thawing earth and fresh hope. Snow still clung to the edges of the trees, but patches of green were beginning to push through. Claire opened the windows that morning for the first time in months. The breeze brought in a chill, but she didn't mind. It made everything feel awake again. She folded Sophie's tiny clothes in the nursery, humming softly. In the background, the monitor played the soft rhythm of nap-time breaths. The house was quiet, but in the kind of way that made her feel full, not alone. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Miles. He stood there in jeans and a button-down sleeves, rolled to the elbows, carrying a cardboard box, and looking every bit like a man who was rebuilding his life from the foundation up. Claire stepped aside and let him in without words. What's in the box? She asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. Miles set it down on the kitchen table. A start. He opened it to reveal frames, photos of Sophie, some of Claire's sketches. He'd saved even a picture of them from years ago at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. They were laughing in it, eyes squinting in sunlight, fingers sticky from ice cream. I thought, if I'm getting a new place, it should have the right memories. Claire looked down at the picture. Her breath caught. You kept this, I kept everything, even the things I didn't know how to face. He pulled out a small wooden ornament. A snowflake, her snowflake. It had hung on their tree every year until the year she left. Then it vanished. She'd assumed it got thrown away, lost in one of his rushed attempts to clean up the mess without actually dealing with it. "You took it?" she asked, voice cracking. "I couldn't throw it out," he said. "It felt like the last piece of you still in the house." She blinked hard. "Why are you showing me this now? Because I'm not hiding anything anymore. Not the grief, not the guilt, and not the hope." He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded slip of paper. Claire hesitated, then opened it. It was a lease for an apartment on Pine Street, 2 blocks from her cottage. Signed. First and last month paid. "You're really doing this?" "I am." She looked up. "Why now?" "Because this time I'm not asking you to move for me. I'm moving for us, for Sophie. For whatever this becomes." Claire felt her heart press against her ribs. Before she could speak, the monitor crackled. Sophie had stirred. Miles looked toward the sound instinctively. Claire touched his arm. "Go get her." He hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded. He climbed the stairs, and a few moments later returned with Sophie tucked into his arms, her sleepy face pressed against his shoulder. She looked at Claire, blinked once, then yawned, and nestled closer into her father's neck. It was such a small moment, but it shattered something inside Claire in the gentlest way. After lunch, they went to the park together. Sophie squealed as she felt grass under her feet for the first time since winter, wobbling between them in little snow boots, too big for spring. Miles took 1,000 pictures. Claire didn't stop him. They sat on a bench afterward, Sophie asleep in the stroller beside them. "I never imagined this," Claire said quietly. Miles turned to her. "What peace. After everything, after the pain, I didn't think it was something I could feel again." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it's real?" She nodded. "I do, but I also know it takes work, that it's not magic, that it's not a fix, it's a choice." She looked at him. Every single day. Miles took her hand, not forcing, just offering. She let him. "I'm not asking for a second chance at the past," he said. "I'm asking for a first chance at whatever we create next." Claire swallowed hard. "You're not the man I married." He winced slightly, but she squeezed his hand. "That's not a bad thing, Miles. You're better now. You chose to grow. You chose to stay. And you chose to survive," he said softly. "And I love the woman that made you." Claire looked down at their hands, then at Sophie's sleeping face mouth, parted in a dream. "Do you know what I want?" she whispered. "What I want to wake up one day and not have to be brave. I want a day where peace is just normal, not earned, not fragile, just life." Miles nodded. "Then let's build that. Quietly, carefully, together." The breeze picked up, rustling the trees around them. Spring wasn't fully here, but it was coming. And this time, Claire was ready. The first snow of December came early that year. It floated softly through the Vermont sky, dusting the rooftops like powdered sugar collecting on windowsills and front porches. Claire stood at the living room window with a cup of tea, warming her hands, watching Sophie press her tiny palms against the glass in wonder. She remembers Claire said aloud more to herself than anyone. Behind her, the front door opened and closed. Miles shook off the snow from his coat and stepped inside, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "You're up early," he said, leaning down to kiss Sophie on the head. "You too, little bean." Claire turned. It's her first real Christmas as a toddler. She gets it this year. The lights, the songs. She asked me last night if Santa was going to bring you a new toothbrush because you forgot yours again. Miles laughed. "Glad to know I'm making a strong impression." He handed her the box. "What's this? Open it." Claire gave him a look, but pulled the twine gently. Inside was a snow globe. But not just any snow globe. Her snow globe. The one they used to keep on the mantel. The one that had cracked the night she left. This one was whole. And inside a tiny replica of the cottage. The same wreath, the same little swing in the tree, and 3 tiny figures, Claire, Miles, and Sophie, standing in front of it holding hands in the snow. Her breath caught. "I had it made," Miles said quietly. "Same artist from the local fair." I gave him a photo. Claire blinked back tears. "It's beautiful. It's ours," he said. "Whole again." She set it gently on the mantel beside a row of pine garland and twinkling lights. It looked like it belonged there. Just like they did. Later that evening, the 3 of them bundled up and walked to the town square. It was Christmas Eve, and the annual church candlelight service had just let out. Bells rang softly in the distance, as families spilled out into the snow, smiling and bundled children singing under their breath. Sophie sat on Miles's shoulders, her mittened hands holding tightly to his scarf as Claire walked beside them. "This is the part I used to dream about," Claire said quietly. Miles looked at her. "Which part?" "All of it. The peace, the ease, the way things feel right without needing to force them." They stopped near the old gazebo, where the nativity scene stood lit gently with soft golden light. Claire stepped closer, her eyes drawn to the small figure of Mary holding baby Jesus. "I used to think I failed because I walked away," she whispered. Miles came up behind her, his voice low. "You didn't. I thought I broke something that couldn't be fixed. You saved something that needed rebuilding." Claire turned to him. "I don't think I ever told you what it was like that night." "The night I left?" Miles was quiet, letting her speak. "I packed Sophie's things in silence. She was only days old. I held her on the porch while snow fell around us. It was Christmas Eve and the world was quiet, like it was holding its breath. And I remember thinking, this can't be what love feels like. This can't be it." She looked down, eyes glistening. "But now, I know what it feels like. Love shows up. Love stays. Love makes space." Miles reached out, brushing her hair gently behind her ear. "I wasn't ready then," he said. "You were right to go." "You weren't the only one who had to grow," she whispered. They stood there for a moment, the snow falling gently around them. Sophie let out a sleepy yawn on Miles's shoulders. Claire looked up. "Let's go home." At the cottage, the fireplace crackled. The lights on the tree glowed in soft colors, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Claire tucked Sophie into her crib, humming a lullaby through tears she didn't try to hide. When she came back downstairs, Miles was standing by the tree holding a small envelope. He handed it to her without a word. Claire opened it slowly. It was a letter. Short. Simple. Handwritten. "Claire, I never got it right the first time. I failed you in 1,000 ways I'm still learning to name. But if love is patient, if it's kind, then I'm asking for one more chance to live that kind of love beside you. Not to undo the past, but to build a future with you. For Sophie. For us. I don't need a wedding to prove it. But I'll ask you anyway. Marry me." Again. Her breath caught. She looked up. Miles was down on one knee. No ring box, just a quiet look of hope and humility. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Her heart was racing, but it wasn't fear. It was clarity. She sank to her knees in front of him. "Yes," she whispered. His eyes widened. "Yes," she said again, firmer this time. "Not because everything's perfect, but because we finally know how to love each other the right way." He pulled her into his arms. They stayed there on the floor, wrapped in warmth and flickering light. Later that night, long after the snow had settled, Claire slipped into Sophie's room and watched her sleep. She held the old divorce papers in her hand, folded, faded. She placed them gently into the fireplace and lit a match. As the flames curled the edges, she whispered, "That chapter's over." And in its place, a new story was already being written, soft as snowfall, steady as breath, and strong as love that had been tested and had chosen again and again to stay. The office was glass and silence. From the 22nd floor of Langford Maritime's Charleston headquarters, the harbor stretched wide and brilliant beneath the morning sun. Boats glided like afterthoughts on the water. Everything down below looked small, easy to ignore. Renee Calder stood in the center of the executive suite, her breath steady, her hands not. The room smelled like polished wood and old money. It was too cold, too clean. And she knew, without turning around, that Derek Langford was watching her the way he always did, like he was deciding whether to invest or divest. She didn't belong here. Not really. The heels were borrowed, the silk blouse bought second-hand, but pressed until perfect. Her lipstick was the only luxury she allowed herself. Crimson, bold, unapologetic, a small rebellion in a world that expected her to whisper. "You said it was urgent." Derek said, his voice flat, not unkind, just efficient. She turned slowly to face him. His suit was flawless. No tie, no, jaw clean-shaven. The kind of man who made decisions that moved markets before lunch. Charleston's golden heir, her boss, and the father of the baby growing inside her. "I'm pregnant." No preamble, no softening. The words settled between them like a dropped glass. Derek didn't flinch, not visibly. He stared at her as if recalculating something. The seconds stretched too long. Renee hated herself for counting them. He walked to the bar cart beside his desk, poured a splash of bourbon into a crystal glass, and took a slow sip. It was 10:17 in the morning. "You're sure, yes?" "Mine. Do you really want me to answer that?" Her voice shook just a little. She willed it to stay calm, like her mother always had after long shifts at the hospital when bad news came calling. Derek didn't respond. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. Renee had dreamed of this moment once. In those early days when everything between them felt stolen and sacred. When he'd laugh and reach across his desk to touch her hand like it meant something. When he whispered her name like a secret. But now the distance between them was glass and oceans, and a life he never intended to claim. "I see," he said finally. That was it. "I see." Renee's heart beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. This wasn't fear. It was disappointment, heavy and bitter in the back of her throat. "I'm keeping the baby." That did it. Derek turned. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp now, calculating. The way they were when he was negotiating a deal he didn't like. "You understand what that means?" he said. "I understand exactly what it means." "No," he replied, taking a step closer. "I don't think you do." His voice had changed. Lower, slower. The mask was coming off. "I'm engaged, Renee. The Langford-Greer merger has been in play for nearly a year. Victoria's family controls half your board seats," she finished. "I know. Then you also know that if this gets out, the board pulls their support. The stock tanks. And everything I've spent 10 years building goes up in smoke." He looked at her now, like she wasn't a person, just a variable. A risk factor. "You think I don't understand stakes," she snapped. "My mother works for Charleston General. 30 years clean record, respected by everyone. My brother just got his first commercial contract with the city. You think I don't know what it means to lose everything?" His expression didn't change. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "Not money, not your name. I came here because I thought you deserved to know." He walked back to his desk, picked up a folder, opened it, closed it, like she wasn't even there. Then he said it. "If you have that baby, I'll destroy your family." The words were quiet, crisp, like a contract being signed. Renee blinked, just once. It was all she would allow. He continued, voice colder now. I'll make one phone call to the hospital board. Start asking questions about your mother's patient logs. I have connections. If I even suggest there's been an oversight. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. And Marcus's contract with the city, Derek added, almost casually. That's through the chamber. My godfather chairs that committee. You think they won't find another landscaper if I recommend it? You're threatening my family because I won't disappear. I'm protecting my future. You're protecting a mistake. Silence. Renee reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. She hadn't planned to bring it, but something in her told her this might be the kind of conversation that needed documentation. She laid it gently on his desk. My ultrasound appointment is next Tuesday. Thought you'd like to know? Then she turned. Renee, he said almost gently now. She paused. I can make this easy. You'll be taken care of. Quietly, you'll be able to go back to whatever life you want. She looked over her shoulder. I never wanted easy, just decent. And then she walked out. The door clicked softly behind her. In the hallway, the receptionist looked up but didn't say anything. Renee gave her a polite nod, stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. Her fingers trembled. The ride down was too fast. Outside, the Charleston air wrapped around her thick with humidity and salt. She took one step forward, then another. The weight of what she was walking away from was nothing compared to the weight of what she was carrying now. A life. And a decision no one else would ever get to make for her again. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The Greyhound terminal in Savannah smelled like stale coffee and yesterday's rain. Renee sat on the last bench near the exit, her suitcase at her feet, and her phone clutched in her hand like it held more than just the last trace of her old life. It had been 3 days since she walked out of Langford Maritime. 3 days since Derek looked her in the eye and promised to dismantle everything she loved. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just closed her eyes on the bus and let the hum of the highway blur the ache in her chest. Now Savannah waited outside the terminal, soft and unfamiliar. Palms rustled against warm brick walls. The air held a different rhythm here, less urgency, more space between breaths. She stood slowly, adjusted the straps of her bag, and walked. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew what she was leaving behind. By nightfall, she had rented a room above a small bakery on Habersham Street. It was narrow and quiet, the ceilings low, the floors crooked. But it was hers. The woman who owned the bakery, Miss Lorna, gave her a tour without asking too many questions. You running from something, honey? She asked, more out of habit than concern. Renee smiled faintly. Running toward something, I hope. Miss Lorna nodded like she'd heard that before, handed her a fresh croissant and patted her arm. Don't forget, sometimes peace sounds a lot like silence. That night, Renee sat cross-legged on the creaky twin bed, her hand resting over her belly. I don't have much, she whispered, but I've got a little strength left, and I swear I'll build us something beautiful. The next morning, she started looking for work. The admin position at a walk-in clinic came up by chance, a handwritten flyer in the bakery window. Nothing glamorous. $14 an hour, no benefits, front desk scheduling phones. Perfect. Dr. Everett Marsh interviewed her personally. He was calm with kind eyes and too many pens in his coat pocket. Tall, soft-spoken mid-30s with sleeves always rolled up like he didn't take himself too seriously. Resume says Charleston. Why Savannah now? He asked, scanning her neatly typed page. I needed a change, Renee said carefully. He looked up at her for a moment, reading between the lines but didn't push. "Well," he said, standing, "we could use someone who knows how to keep calm when the waiting room's full and nobody brought their insurance cards." That was it. No questions about her past, just trust offered like a clean glass of water. Renee started the following Monday. The clinic was small, tucked between a laundromat and a consignment shop. The work was non-stop, phones ringing, patients, frustrated kids crying. But there was something steadying about it. Like her life had a rhythm again, even if it wasn't the one she planned. Everett was patient and generous. He took his coffee with too much sugar and always thanked her for staying late, even when he was the one still finishing paperwork at 8 p.m. He wasn't the kind of man who filled a room, but he made it feel safe. One Tuesday afternoon, a woman came in to drop off paperwork, and while Renee filed forms behind the counter, Everett leaned over and whispered, "That's my mother. Be nice." She judges quietly. Renee laughed for the first time in days. By the second month, she knew everyone's lunch orders and which patients needed extra kindness. She still hadn't told anyone about the pregnancy her bump wasn't showing yet, and she wore loose sweaters grateful for the cold snap. But it was coming. The time when she'd have to explain everything. One afternoon, as she was closing out the schedule for the day, Everett lingered by the front desk. "You ever walk along the river at night?" he asked, eyes on the paperwork in her hands. Renee looked up. "Not really." "You should. Lights on the water help clear your head. And there's a coffee truck that makes decent peppermint hot chocolate." She smiled. "Are you recommending it professionally or personally?" He paused, gave her a look halfway between nervous and hopeful. "Maybe both." For a second, she let herself imagine it standing beside him under string lights, sipping cocoa, pretending her life was simple. Pretending she wasn't carrying a secret with a last name that could tear this new world apart. But her smile faded. "I appreciate it." "I do," she said softly. "But I've got things I need to focus on right now." Everett nodded. "Not hurt, just understanding. You ever change your mind?" He said, "You know where to find me." That night, Renee stood at the window of her little room and listened to the city breathe. Below, the bakery lights glowed warm and gold. Her world was small now, smaller than it had ever been. But it was safe. And she wasn't ready to risk it. Not yet. She pulled the small notebook from her nightstand, the one she'd started the day she left Charleston, and flipped to the next blank page. She wrote, "I said no today, not because I didn't want to say yes, but because I need to be sure I'm choosing a future that sees all of me, not just the parts that fit neatly in someone else's life. I'll know it when it's right. And until then, I've got you." She pressed her hand gently to her stomach. And for the first time since Derek Langford's office, she didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was becoming. The letter came in a cream envelope with no return address, slid beneath the clinic's front door sometime before sunrise. Renee noticed it as she turned the key, still balancing her coffee cup, and unlocking the front desk drawer. The moment her eyes landed on it, something in her gut shifted. It was the paper, the weight of it, the way her name was written in dark ink, Renee Calder, with careful, deliberate strokes. She stared at it for a full minute before touching it. Then she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, distant, almost formal. "Miss Calder, I regret the timing, but certain estate matters require your immediate attention. You are listed as the sole surviving beneficiary of the late Jonathan Myers. We ask that you contact our office at your earliest convenience. With respect, Elise Myers." She read it twice. Then a third time. Jonathan Myers. The name felt like something pulled from a locked drawer in her memory. Her mother had mentioned him only once years ago, long before Renee knew how little truth adults sometimes told their children. She folded the letter slowly, her fingers now shaking. That night she called her mother. Carol Calder answered on the second ring, her voice warm but cautious, as if expecting the worst. "Renee, baby. Everything okay?" Renee didn't speak for a moment. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, staring at the ceiling. "Do you remember a man named Jonathan Myers?" she asked. Silence. Then a slow exhale. "Oh," Carol said quietly. "That name." Renee waited. "He was part of my life before you were born. Not for long, just a few months. He wanted different things, Renee. He wanted to keep his name clean. I wasn't that kind of woman in his world. Was he my yes?" The word cut clean through the quiet. Renee's hand tightened around the phone. "Why didn't you ever tell me I was trying to protect you? And honestly, I never thought he'd leave anything behind." He never called again. Not once. There was no anger in her mother's voice, just the weariness of memory. He knew I was pregnant, and he still walked away. Renee felt something press against her ribs from the inside. Maisie kicked just once. A reminder. "I have a letter from a woman named Elise Myers." His wife Carol's voice changed instantly, sharper now. Guarded. Elise was always smarter than he was. Fierce. I didn't expect to ever hear from her. She wants to meet. She wouldn't ask unless she had a reason. The next afternoon, Renee boarded a bus to Atlanta. It rained the entire ride. By the time she arrived at the address printed in the letter, her nerves felt like exposed wire. The neighborhood was quiet, green, old money calm. The house was tucked behind a wrought iron gate, not enormous, but stately, like it had earned its place there. Elise Myers opened the door herself. She was tall, silver-haired, with a presence that filled the space before she even spoke. "You have her eyes," she said simply. Renee nodded, unsure what to say. They sat in a study with deep armchairs and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire burned low behind a screen, and the only sound was the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Elise wasted no time. Jonathan died 8 months ago. Heart failure. Quick. We'd been separated for years, but legally I was still executor of his estate. She reached for a folder on the coffee table and handed it to Renee. "He left everything to you." Renee stared at the folder, not touching it. "I don't understand. He felt guilty. Not enough to do the right thing while he was alive, of course." "But guilt finds men late, Renee, especially when time runs out." Renee finally looked up, her voice flat. "I don't want his money." Elise gave a small smile. "Neither did I. That's why I made sure it wasn't just money." She leaned forward. "Jonathan didn't just invest in stock markets. He co-founded a small venture fund 10 years ago, mostly tech startups. Quiet, low profile, but successful. I'm the managing partner now. He transferred his equity to you." Renee blinked. "What you own 5% of a firm worth over 70 million. And more than that, I believe you're capable of doing something with it." Renee stared at the flames. "I'm an office manager at a clinic. I schedule appointments and fix the copier." Elise didn't laugh. She just said, "You know how to keep a place running. That's more than half the battle. Come back to Atlanta, learn the business. We'll see if there's a future for you here." "I'm pregnant." "I assumed." "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Elise said. "I know you came alone. You came when you didn't have to. And you're still sitting here listening even though your whole world just turned upside down." Silence fell again. A long, careful pause. Then Elise added, "You don't owe him forgiveness, Renee, but you might be the best thing he ever did." Later that night, Renee walked the streets near her hotel in a daze. The city felt bigger than Savannah, louder than Charleston, yet something about it felt possible. She sat on a park bench beneath a street lamp and placed her hand gently on her stomach. "What do you think?" she whispered. The baby kicked again. As if to say, "We're not done yet." Back in Savannah the next morning, she returned to the clinic with her mind full and her heart divided. Everett looked up as she walked in. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Just a lot on my mind. Anything I can help with?" For a moment, she almost told him everything. About Jonathan Myers, about Elise, about the offer, the door she never expected to open. But instead she smiled, small and tired. "You already have." And for now, that was enough. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The conference hall smelled of sea salt and fresh paint, polished for appearances like everything else in Charleston. Renee adjusted the hem of her slate-gray dress and stepped onto the marble floor of the Langford Maritime Investment Summit, her heels clicking with every step, deliberate and calm. No one knew she was back. Not really. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She hadn't planned to return. Not this soon. Not this boldly. But Elise had called 2 weeks ago with a short, firm message. "You've done the homework. Now it's time to speak." The firm had chosen her, to present a new women-led investment initiative to a crowd of high-profile donors, venture capitalists, and Charleston's most ruthless elite. What Elise hadn't mentioned, Langford Maritime was hosting the entire summit. The room buzzed with muted conversations, expensive laughter, and the invisible weight of reputation. Name tags gleamed like armor. Champagne flutes danced in manicured hands. Every table was marked by industry power shipping energy tech, old money pretending to embrace new. Renee smoothed her hair, her heart steady, despite the current pressing beneath her skin. She walked to the front row, where Elise waited elegant in navy silk, a glass of club soda in her hand. Her eyes lit up at the sight of Renee. "You look like you own the place." "I don't," Renee murmured, just here to rent the mic. Elise smiled. "That's how it starts." They moved toward the stage together. Renee's name was printed on the agenda in fine serif font, Renee Calder, Director, Calder Ventures. No one here knew who she used to be, or so she thought. Across the room, Derek Langford stood near the back, surrounded by a semicircle of board members and sycophants. He wore a dark suit, crisp and confident. His laugh cut through the air like a knife pretending to be velvet. He hadn't seen her yet. Renee's breath caught for a second, but she kept walking. When she stepped onto the stage, the lights hit her like warm clarity. She took the podium, adjusted the mic, and let the silence settle. Not too long. Just enough. Then she spoke. "Good morning. My name is Renee Calder, and I'm here because the most powerful thing a woman can build isn't just a business. It's a life she doesn't have to escape from." The room stilled. She saw heads turn. A few pens dropped. Phones lowered. "I stand here not with a pitch deck, but with a promise. Calder Ventures is launching a new fund dedicated solely to women-led startups, especially those founded by single mothers, caregivers, and first-generation entrepreneurs who were never given a seat but built their own table anyway." Murmurs, a shift. The tone of the summit began to bend around her like light through glass. "I know what it's like to start from nothing, to feel invisible in a room full of power. But I also know what it's like to walk away from everything and begin again." The words didn't shake. Her voice was clear, controlled. But in her chest, her heart pounded. In the back of the room, Derek Langford had turned to stone. Victoria Greer, seated beside Preston near the catering station, leaned in to whisper something too fast, too sharp. Preston's eyes narrowed. He knew. They both knew. The presentation ended with polite applause at first. Then it grew. Stronger. Real. When Renee stepped off the stage, a line of investors was already forming to speak with her. Elise leaned in and whispered, "You just rewrote your story in real time." Renee smiled politely, shaking hands, nodding through praise she barely heard. Because across the room, Derek was staring at her, and he wasn't smiling. He walked toward her slowly, pausing only to discard his untouched drink on a passing tray. His eyes never left hers. She braced herself. The crowd moved around them like a tide, but in that moment everything slowed. "Renee." She turned to face him. He looked older, more tired around the eyes, but the arrogance still hovered beneath the surface like smoke waiting to catch fire. "I wasn't aware Calder Ventures was involved in this summit," he said. "That's because we were invited. Not announced." A muscle in his jaw shifted. "You've certainly reinvented yourself." "I didn't reinvent anything," she replied quietly. "I just stopped hiding." He glanced down at her left hand. No ring. "I heard a rumor," he said, voice lower now, "that you're a mother." She held his gaze. "Is that something you want to confirm?" he asked. "No," she replied. "It's something you gave up the right to ask about." His expression cracked just slightly. "Enough to register. You think I don't deserve to know? I think you made your position very clear 4 years ago. That was a different time, different circumstances." "No," she said softly. "It was the same. You just thought I wouldn't survive it." He stepped closer. Not enough to invade, just enough that the air felt charged. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Renee tilted her head. "Nothing," she whispered. "That's the part you never understood. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back because I didn't have to stay gone." She turned and walked away, and didn't look back. Later that evening, she sat on the edge of the hotel bed heels, off hair pinned up, her laptop open. Maisie's photo, tucked into her wallet, lay beside her keyboard. Elise knocked once before entering. "You made waves," she said, sitting beside her. "Victoria's already called 3 donors trying to figure out how to outmaneuver you. Let her try." Elise chuckled. "You handled Derek well." "I didn't handle him," Renee replied. "I just refused to fold." Elise looked at her for a long moment. "You're not the same woman I met 3 months ago." Renee picked up the photo of her daughter. "No," she said softly. "I'm the mother she'll remember." And outside, the Charleston skyline blinked quietly under the dusk, watching as a woman who'd once been broken returned not to shatter but to shine. The email came at 7:04 a.m. sharp. Subject line: Langford Maritime immediate inquiry regarding Calder Ventures partnership. Renee stared at it as her coffee cooled untouched beside her. She was still at the Charleston Hotel, the sun barely lifting over the harbor, casting long gold shadows across the patterned rug. Her inbox had been quiet all morning until that. She clicked. "Dear Ms. Calder, we have been informed of certain potential conflicts of interest involving your newly announced investment initiative and former professional associations. Our executive board requests a clarification meeting within 48 hours. Respectfully, Victoria Greer, Senior Counsel, Langford Maritime." Renee leaned back slowly in the armchair, blinking once. So it began. Victoria wasn't going to confront her directly. She'd use protocol, paper trails, official language laced with quiet threats. Elise entered a moment later, hair swept back, navy blazer already on, as if she hadn't stopped moving since last night. "Got the email?" she asked. "Just now." Elise sat on the edge of the table and folded her arms. "This is a strategic play. They're not going to stop you. They're going to try to bury you in red tape and questions. They'll make you doubt your right to be here." "Do I need to respond?" No, Elise said. You need to decide if you're ready to fight back publicly, because if you do, it won't be private anymore. Renee looked down at her phone. A missed call from Everett. She hadn't returned his messages since the summit, hadn't told him she was back in Charleston, and now her life was unfolding on a stage she never meant to build. I need air, she murmured. Charleston's Market Street was already humming with tourists and trolley bells, the scent of pralines and humidity thick in the breeze. Renee walked without purpose, the heels of her boots ticking against cobblestone. She turned a corner and nearly collided with a tall man carrying a paper cup and a cinnamon bun wrapped in wax paper. Renee. She froze. Everett. He looked almost out of place here, still in his white sneakers and clinic pullover, holding a pastry with the same gentle grip he used to check pulses. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I was in town for a cardiology conference, he said, stepping back with a sheepish smile. I thought I saw your name on the summit program. I wasn't sure if it was... You? It's me, she said softly. It's... a lot. Yeah, he said, looking at her for a beat. You okay? She hesitated, then shook her head. I'm standing in the middle of the city I ran from, holding more power than I ever wanted, being quietly attacked by the same people who once dismissed me. And I haven't seen my daughter in 3 days. Everett nodded, eyes kind but focused. Let's walk. They moved down East Bay Street together, steps falling into rhythm without effort. He didn't push. He didn't ask questions, just walked beside her waiting. After a while, she exhaled. When I left Savannah, I thought I was stepping into a future I finally owned. But now, I feel like I'm back in the middle of someone else's war. You're not, he said. You're just walking through the battlefield they left behind. She looked over at him. You make that up? Stole it from a patient who survived open-heart surgery. She said pain is the tax you pay for living through something that was meant to break you. Renee gave a small laugh. That's heavy. Yeah, he said, smiling. But kind of brilliant, too. They stopped near a bench facing the water. She sat. He handed her the cinnamon bun. I already ate half, but sugar helps. She took it, tearing off a piece, then paused. I've been meaning to tell you something. Everett leaned back on the bench arms, resting on the edge. I figured. I have a daughter. Her name is Maisie. She's 3. I didn't tell you before because I wasn't ready. I was still figuring out how to be both someone's mother and someone who hadn't lost herself. He didn't react with surprise. No wide eyes, no pulled-back silence. He just nodded. Is she the reason you're doing all this? Renee looked out at the water. She's the reason I didn't stay small. They sat in the quiet for a long moment, wind tugging at her coat. Everett broke the silence. Do you want to come back to Savannah? To something slower? Something that's not built on people who want to see you fall just because you had the nerve to stand up. Renee turned to face him. I don't know, she said truthfully. Part of me wants to run back and just raise my daughter in peace. But another part of me, the part that remembers that day in Derek's office, wants to finish this. Everett's voice was calm. Then finish it. But make sure you're not letting their chaos decide who you are. You don't have to prove anything to the people who already chose not to see you. She didn't say anything, just looked at him. The kind of looking you do when you realize someone sees the parts of you you've hidden even from yourself. And for a flicker of a moment, she wished this life had started differently. With him. Later that evening, Renee sat at the small writing desk in her hotel room and opened her laptop. She drafted a public statement. It wasn't a denial, it wasn't a defense, it was a declaration. I was once told that if I chose to have my child, I would lose everything. Instead, I found myself. and I built a future that didn't require anyone's permission to exist. If that makes certain institutions uncomfortable, that's a reflection of their fragility, not my integrity. We're here to build, and we're not leaving quietly." She hit post and let the silence swallow the moment. A minute later, the notifications began. The war had begun. But this time she wasn't running. The storm didn't arrive with thunder, it came with headlines. By noon, Renee's statement had made the rounds through Charleston's business circles and beyond. It was shared, dissected, applauded, whispered about in boardrooms and bridal salons alike. Some called it bold, others reckless, but no one could ignore it. By 2 p.m., Elise forwarded her an internal Langford Maritime memo. In light of recent public disclosures and unresolved private matters, the board will convene to reevaluate future sponsorships and affiliations pertaining to the Calder Ventures initiative. They were trying to cut her off at the knees. Renee closed the laptop slowly and looked out the window of the suite. The city below buzzed with its usual grace, sunlight glinting off copper steeples, and wrought iron balconies, tourists laughing 2 floors down as if lives weren't being rewritten just above them. Her phone vibrated. One message. From an unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet." She stared at the words for a long second, the pressure behind her eyes sharp and hot. Then she deleted the message and turned to find Elise already walking through the door with her usual speed and calm fury. "They're scrambling," Elise said, setting her bag down. "And that message, classic Langford tactic, harassment dressed in expensive shoes." "I knew they'd push back," Renee murmured. "But I didn't think it would sting like this." Elise sat crossed one leg over the other and looked at her with a seriousness that pulled the air tight. "They are not pushing back because you're weak. They're pushing back because for the first time you've made them afraid. Afraid of what? Of what happens when the women they used to underestimate decide they've had enough." Renee swallowed hard. The words hit somewhere deep. "Victoria's the real weapon now," Elise added. "She's moved 2 of the largest donors behind closed doors. She's playing long game strategy." Renee nodded slowly. "And Derek, he's quiet. That's worse than if he were yelling." Renee stood, walked to the mirror, and stared at her reflection. Her face looked calm, but something inside her wouldn't stop pacing. She needed clarity, grounding, something real. "I need to go home." Elise tilted her head. "Savannah, number home. She didn't wait for approval. 3 hours later, Renee stood outside her mother's 1-story ranch, nestled in a quiet suburb, where the trees arched like old protectors and wind chimes sang in the breeze. The porch light was already on, though the sky hadn't gone fully dark. Carol opened the door and pulled her daughter into a hug, without a word. Inside, Maisie was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug stacking colored blocks. When she saw Renee, her face lit up. "Mama." The weight in Renee's chest cracked open. She dropped to her knees and held her daughter like she hadn't seen her in years. Maisie leaned back and frowned. "You smell like hotel soap." Renee laughed through her tears. "I missed you too, honeybee." Carol watched from the hallway, arms crossed. "She's been asking for you every night," I know, Renee said. "I should have come sooner. You're here now." Later, after Maisie fell asleep, curled next to her on the couch, Renee sat in the kitchen while her mother made tea. The air smelled like lemon and sleep. "I saw your statement," Carol said without looking up. "Of course you did. You were brave." Renee shrugged. "I was cornered. That's what makes it brave." Carol poured the tea, set a mug in front of her, and sat down across the table. "So, what happens now?" "They're going to try to block my funding. Try to tie my name to scandal, say I manipulated my way into power. Will it work? I don't think so. But they'll try." Carol leaned forward. "Let them. You've already won something they can't take back. Renee looked up. What you walked back into that city with your name, your story, and your daughter's future, and you never bowed. That's more than most women in that town ever got to do. A beat passed. Then Carol added, and that man, Derek. He hasn't changed, has he? No, Renee said quietly. He just hides it better. Carol's eyes softened. People like him always underestimate women who build their strength in silence. Renee sipped her tea and let her shoulders ease for the first time all day. It was almost midnight when her phone buzzed again, this time a different message. From Everett. I saw your post. I don't have the right to be proud of you, but I am anyway. Maisie deserves this version of her mother. So do you. Renee stared at the words, her throat thick. Then another message followed. You're not alone in this. Not unless you choose to be. She didn't respond right away. Just sat in the quiet house, her mother sleeping down the hall, her daughter nestled beside her on the couch, and the city waiting to strike again by morning. But in this moment, wrapped in the stillness of home, Renee Calder felt something rare. She felt ready. Not to survive, but to win. The morning after returning from her mother's house, Renee stood in front of the Calder Ventures office in downtown Atlanta, staring at the glass door like it might shatter under the weight of her next step. She had barely crossed the threshold before Elise appeared from the hallway, a tablet in one hand, coffee in the other. You're trending, Elise said dryly. Congratulations. Half of the Southeast thinks you're a disruptor. The other half thinks you're dangerous. Renee exhaled. Which half has more power? Depends on how afraid they are of a woman who doesn't blink. They walked toward the conference room. Inside, a team of 3 junior partners and a brand consultant sat at the long table folders, open screens glowing. They all looked up the moment Renee entered. Elise gestured to the head of the table. Your seat. It still felt strange, like the room expected someone taller, louder, older. But she sat, lifted her chin, and folded her hands. Jasmine, the branding consultant, clicked to a new slide on the screen. We're fielding a lot of investor inquiries, some cautious, some curious, and a few. She glanced at Elise. Backing out, Victoria's team leaked a partial transcript of a private call from your Charleston meeting. Renee stiffened. Which part they spun it to imply you threatened Langford Maritime's legitimacy with an unregulated fund. It's vague, but people are grabbing it. Renee looked at Elise. We were careful, Elise said. But people believe what they're told when the narrative makes them feel safe. Renee sat back thinking. Then she asked, Who do we still have? Jasmine tapped the screen again. 4 strong anchor investors still on board. All women. 2 of them are founders you backed personally last year. One of them said she'd double down if we go public with the full context. Meaning you tell your story, Elise said. Not just in a press release, live, publicly, unapologetically. A pause. Then Renee asked, You want me to do an interview? No, Jasmine said. I want you to own the interview. Renee nodded slowly, the wheels already turning. Fine. One condition. Everyone looked up. I want it filmed at the clinic, where I started. Jasmine blinked. That's unconventional, exactly, Renee said. They want to paint me as some corporate ghost with an axe to grind. But I'm still that woman answering phones and fixing copy machines. They need to see that. Elise smiled faintly. Let them see it. All of it. 2 days later, the lights were set up inside the small lobby of the Savannah Clinic. The room looked smaller, now Renee hadn't noticed how much space memory could take up. Everett was there, just out of frame, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a cautious expression on his face. You sure you want to do this here? He asked quietly. She nodded. This is where the truth started. The interviewer was young, confident, and clearly briefed, but respectful. She asked her questions with a calm clarity that made Renee's answers sharper than she expected. Why now, the woman asked. Why choose to speak up after so many years of silence? Renee looked directly into the lens. Because silence isn't always survival. Sometimes it's surrender. And I'm not here to surrender. She paused, then added, For years I believed, if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed quiet, I could earn peace. But peace doesn't come from pretending you weren't wronged. It comes from telling the truth and letting it echo. The room stilled. Everett watched her like he was seeing her for the first time again. After the interview, as the crew began to pack up, he approached her. You were incredible. Renee gave a tired smile. You always say that, because you keep proving me right. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, something weightier, more careful. She met his eyes. I don't know what happens next. Neither do I, he said, but I'd like to be there when it does. For a long second, she said nothing. Then quietly, even if it gets messier before it gets better, he smiled soft. Especially then. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. There was no grand declaration. Just a moment held between them, honest and open and real. The next morning, the interview aired. Within hours, calls flooded in. The full transcript circulated. Support poured in from unexpected places. Founders, single mothers, small business owners, even a few quiet voices inside Langford Maritime. But the one name she didn't expect to see, Preston Langford. He emailed directly. Renee, I think it's time we talk. Off the record, just you and me. No handlers, no board. Just a conversation that should have happened 4 years ago. P. Renee stared at the screen for a long time, her heart a quiet drum. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she walked outside into the late afternoon sun and stood beneath the same oak tree she passed every morning at the clinic. Its roots ran deep. Its branches stretched far. She closed her eyes and breathed in the stillness. And when she opened them, the storm didn't feel so loud anymore. The cafe Preston chose was tucked into a quiet corner of the Charleston Historic District, far from the waterfront venues and polished towers of Langford Maritime. It wasn't the kind of place you brought business. It was where you hid from it. Renee arrived early. She chose a seat by the window where the light could reach her face, where she could see him walk in. She wore a soft cream blouse, no blazer, no earrings, just herself. The version of her that had no interest in performance. Preston entered precisely at noon. He spotted her instantly, but took his time walking over. He was tall, clean-shaven, with the same tightly wound energy she remembered, like every thought was a transaction. But something was different. Less polished. His eyes didn't carry that same boardroom gloss. He sat across from her without a handshake. Thank you for coming, he said. You didn't leave much room to say no. He nodded, accepting the jab. Fair. The waitress came by and took orders: coffee for him, lemon tea for her. Neither touched the menu. When they were alone again, Preston leaned forward. I watched the interview. Twice, Renee didn't respond. I won't pretend I liked it, he added, but I respected it. That's not what this is about, though. Is it? She asked. He smiled faintly. No. This is about fallout and choices. Yours or mine, both. He paused, took a slow breath. There's talk at the top that Derek may step back from day-to-day operations at Langford. Temporarily, of course. But it's a crack. Renee raised an eyebrow. And you want me to do what with that information? Nothing. Just understand the game board is changing. She narrowed her gaze. Cut to it, Preston. What do you want? He leaned back. I want this to stop before it burns us all down. Renee's fingers curled around the base of her teacup. Her voice stayed even. "You mean before it burns him down?" "No," Preston said. "I mean us. The legacy. The name. My father built that company from nothing. Derek might have driven it forward, but I'm trying to keep it alive. And you're becoming the symbol for everything we failed to adapt to." Renee tilted her head. "I'm not your cautionary tale." "No," he said. "You're the storm we ignored until the windows cracked." They stared at each other for a long moment. The hum of the cafe around them blurred into background noise. Renee finally spoke softer now. "Do you know what he said to me the day I told him I was pregnant? Preston didn't move. He said if I had that baby, he'd destroy my family. And when I left, he didn't just forget me, he erased me. Like I was a miscalculation." Preston's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He didn't just reject fatherhood, she continued. He tried to shame me into silence. "You call this fallout. I call it truth catching up." His voice dropped lower, tighter. "What do you want, Renee?" She looked at him hard. "I want you to want better, not just for optics, but for the daughters you might have one day, for the women you work beside, for your own conscience." Preston looked down at his coffee, then back at her. "What if I told you?" "I do." She blinked. "What if I told you that I've been pushing back from the inside quietly, strategically, that I convinced 2 donors to stay neutral until the board votes, that I made sure Elise got every piece of intel she needed from our internal memos?" Renee's heart skipped. "You're the leak. I'm the balance," he said simply. "I don't want to destroy Derek. I want him out of the way long enough for real leadership to rise." Renee exhaled the tension in her chest, shifting shape. "And you want me to help? I want us to align. Your voice, my access." For the first time since he'd walked in, she considered him without suspicion, just as a man trying to untangle a legacy that no longer served him. She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." He stood to leave, pulling a sleek envelope from his jacket and placing it on the table. "Details," he said. "And full discretion." Then, without another word, he left. Renee didn't open the envelope right away. She finished her tea. Let the weight of the conversation settle around her like dust, finding its place on an old shelf. Back at her hotel that evening, she sat on the floor of the suite with Maisie building a city from wooden blocks. Her daughter giggled as the towers toppled again and again, never minding the collapse. "Mama make it taller?" Maisie demanded, holding up 2 pink blocks. "I'm trying," Renee laughed, stacking carefully. Maisie watched her with big eyes. "Why do you look tired when you smile?" Renee's hands froze. She looked down at her daughter. Maisie blinked. That question. That perfect, piercing question. Renee gathered her into her lap and held her close. "Because sometimes," she whispered, growing stronger, "feels a lot like breaking." Maisie rested her small head against her shoulder and whispered back, "But you're not broken." Renee kissed the top of her head. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." And for the first time in days, that truth felt real. The boardroom at Langford Maritime was colder than Renee remembered. Not the temperature, though the AC hummed just a little too high, but the air itself. Tighter, more controlled, as if the walls had learned how to hold secrets better than the people inside them. She sat across from Elise, her folder neatly closed posture, poised but not rigid. Preston stood near the window, flipping through a report like it was just another Tuesday, like the company his family built wasn't preparing to vote on whether to distance itself from the very woman he'd once helped push out. Victoria Greer entered last, carrying her usual air of brittle composure. She acknowledged no one, just took her seat and opened her leather-bound tablet. "Let's begin," she said crisply. We're here to review the recent allegations, public statements, and the implications for Langford Maritime's philanthropic partnerships, particularly Calder Ventures. Renee didn't flinch. She watched Victoria like someone who'd already memorized the ending of a book and was just waiting for the rest to catch up. The boardroom filled with murmurs, papers, rustling, throats clearing. No one spoke to her directly, not yet. They circled around her with phrases like potential reputational risk and exposure to liability. But no one asked the real question. No one asked why a company that prided itself on community investment was so eager to silence the story of the woman who used to type their minutes and refill their coffee pots. Until Preston cleared his throat. "I'd like to ask Miss Calder a direct question." All heads turned. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "This is not a trial." "No," Preston said, "but it's about integrity. And if we're going to weigh that, we should hear from the woman at the center of it." Victoria leaned back, unamused. "Very well." Preston turned to Renee, voice calm. "Why now?" She met his gaze. "Because silence got me nowhere. And because I finally realized telling the truth wasn't about revenge, it was about recovery." Victoria interjected, voice sharp. "Your truth damaged donor confidence and put our future initiatives at risk. You made it personal." Renee's voice didn't rise, but it landed. "It was always personal for me. I carried a child while trying to carry the weight of being invisible to people I once called colleagues. I sat in meetings you chaired, Victoria, while wondering how I'd afford formula. I built a fund to give other women a way out of that silence." The room quieted. A shift. Slight, but undeniable. Renee continued, her voice softer now. "I'm not asking Langford Maritime for validation. I don't need your board's stamp of approval to keep building what I started. But I will not let this institution rewrite history to protect the comfort of men who tried to erase mine." Elise sat forward slightly, just enough for Renee to feel her presence beside her unwavering. Preston looked around the room. "We have a decision to make," he said. "Not just about a partnership, about who we are as a company, and who we listen to when the truth gets uncomfortable." Victoria's lips thinned. "Let's recess. 15 minutes." The room emptied slowly, executives stepping out one by one, murmuring among themselves. Renee stayed seated. When the door clicked shut, Preston leaned in. "You were brilliant." "I wasn't trying to be," she said. "I know. That's why it worked." She looked at him. "Do you believe me now?" Preston paused. "I always did. I just didn't have the courage to say it out loud." Renee exhaled. "That's the thing, Preston. Belief in silence feels a lot like betrayal. He didn't defend himself. She didn't need him to." As they waited in silence, Renee's phone buzzed. A text from Everett. "We're watching. Me and Maisie? She said you look like a queen." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. When the board returned, the mood had shifted. Not entirely in her favor, but not against her either. Victoria read the final decision aloud, with a tone that tried and failed to sound neutral. "The board will maintain Calder Ventures as a partner in our Women in Innovation initiative. All further collaboration will proceed under new transparency standards and shared messaging guidelines." Renee didn't blink. Preston nodded. "It's a start." Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the city in gold and promise. Renee stepped into it like someone shedding an old skin. Elise joined her on the sidewalk, pulling off her heels with a wince. "You know what this means, right?" Elise said. "That I still have work to do." "No," Elise replied. "That you just made history in a room built to forget you." Renee looked up at the skyline, Charleston's sharp lines and old corners, so familiar, so different now. She wasn't a whisper in someone else's legacy anymore. She was the author of her own. and the story wasn't done yet. The evening air in Savannah was thick with summer, but the breeze coming off the river brought a softness that made it bearable. Renee stood on the rooftop terrace of the newly opened Calder Foundation office, watching the sun lower itself behind the skyline, like it was folding itself into memory. The building was still buzzing with post-launch chatter donors, mingling journalists snapping photos, young founders pitching dreams that sounded like echoes of Renee's past. She wasn't mingling. Not yet. Elise had handled most of the event coordination, floating between circles, with her signature sharp smile and efficient grace. Renee was there in name and presence, but her mind was somewhere quieter. "Figured I'd find you up here?" She turned. Everett stood a few feet away, dressed in a linen button-down and dark slacks, holding 2 sparkling lemonades. His collar was slightly crooked, like he'd rushed getting dressed and hadn't noticed. Renee smiled soft and tired. "You always seem to know where I'll run." "I don't chase," he said, handing her a glass. "I just wait where I know the good things go." She took it, letting the carbonation sting her throat before replying. Tonight was supposed to feel like the top of the mountain, but it doesn't. He leaned against the railing beside her. "Because you're still carrying the climb." They stood in silence for a beat, the quiet between them feeling full, not empty. Finally, she said, "I saw Derek today." Everett looked over, brows lifting slightly. "At the event, no," she said. "Outside the hotel." "I think he was waiting." Everett said nothing, but the stillness in his body changed. "He didn't say anything cruel," she continued. "Didn't threaten, didn't ask for anything. Just stood there. Quiet. Almost small." "And how did that feel?" he asked. Renee turned her gaze back towards the city lights. "Like watching a shadow that used to scare you turn into a man who can't hurt you anymore." Everett nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you," Renee blinked. "I'm not sure I need that." "No," he said, "but you deserve it." She looked at him, really looked. "Why did you stay?" she asked. "Through all of this. When I pushed, when I pulled away, when I didn't tell you the full story until it spilled out of me in public." He thought for a moment. "Because I saw who you were before the storm. And I wanted to be around to see who you'd become after it passed." Her throat tightened. "But I'm still in the middle of it, Everett." He smiled. "Then I'll stay a little longer." Downstairs, music drifted up through the open doors. Renee could hear the echo of clinking glasses, the soft hum of conversations about impact and equity and change. But it all felt far away compared to the clarity of the rooftop, the honesty of this space between them. "I'm afraid of what's next," she admitted quietly. "Afraid I've won something that doesn't know how to hold me." "You didn't win," Everett said. "You built. There's a difference." She glanced at him. "And if it all falls apart," he leaned in slightly. "Then we build again." Renee looked away, blinking fast, the air thick with more than humidity now. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed. A message. From Victoria. "Dinner. Tomorrow. Just us. I think it's time we stopped being on opposite sides of a mirror." Renee stared at the words, rereading them 3 times. Everett saw the shift in her face. "Everything okay?" She held out the phone. He read it and raised an eyebrow. "Victoria. That's unexpected." "Or overdue?" Renee murmured. She pocketed the phone, turned back to the skyline, and exhaled slowly. "I used to think closure came in the form of apologies, grand gestures. But maybe it's just 2 people finally willing to look each other in the eye." "Will you go?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Because the only thing harder than confrontation is avoiding it." Everett didn't respond right away. Then gently, If it gets hard, if she tries to turn it on you again, promise me you won't shrink. Renee looked at him, something steady rising in her chest. I don't know how to be small anymore. They both smiled. She leaned on the railing again, letting the moment settle. Down below, Elise waved up at them, motioning that press wanted a final photo of the founding team. Renee turned to Everett, tipping her head toward the stairs. Ready to go back into the spotlight? Not really, he grinned. But I'll follow your lead. As they walked back inside, hand brushing hand but not quite touching Renee, felt something shift. Not the world, not the foundation, not even the fight, but something inside her. The kind of shift that says this isn't just survival anymore, it's life. The restaurant was dim quiet and far too elegant for anything casual. Renee knew that was deliberate. Victoria didn't do casual. Everything she touched had to be curated, measured, framed. Even this dinner, just 2 women, no staff, no press, had a sense of performance to it. Renee arrived 5 minutes early. Victoria was already seated, unsurprisingly dressed in muted navy with pearls that looked too expensive to be worn so easily. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. You came, Victoria said as Renee slid into the seat across from her. I said I would. A waiter approached, took their drink orders, sparkling water for both, and disappeared like a shadow. Victoria folded her hands. I thought about not reaching out. I thought about not responding. They shared a small, almost amused silence. I watched your interview, Victoria said. I figured. You were polished. I wasn't trying to be. Victoria tilted her head. That's what made it dangerous. Renee let that hang in the air for a moment. So she said, is this where you try to negotiate a truce? No, Victoria replied. This is where I ask you a question. Renee leaned back slightly. Go ahead. What do you want, Renee? Not from Langford. Not from the board. From me. It wasn't the question she expected. She took a breath, looked down at the linen napkin in her lap, then back up. I want to understand how a woman as smart as you became the mouthpiece for a man like Derek. Victoria's expression didn't flicker. You think that's what I was? I don't think. I know. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly, but she nodded. That's fair. Silence returned, heavy and complex. Then Victoria said, You weren't supposed to survive it. Renee blinked. Excuse me, I don't mean physically, Victoria clarified. I mean politically, socially. Derek assumed you'd fade out of sight, take the payout, disappear. He was certain. And you believed him. I did, Victoria admitted. Not because I wanted to, but because that's how it usually goes. Women like you, we don't get to rewrite the narrative. Renee narrowed her eyes. What changed you did. There was no softness in her tone. Just something that resembled respect. You built something we couldn't bury, Victoria continued. And then you had the nerve to make it righteous. You wrapped truth in purpose. It made you hard to fight. Renee sat still, her hands curled around the stem of her water glass, but she didn't drink. I didn't do it for war, she said. I did it for air, for the right to breathe and build a life without being someone's cautionary tale. Victoria nodded slowly. And yet here we are. The waiter returned with their waters and offered menus. Neither took one. When he left, Renee said quietly, He told me he'd destroy my family if I had that baby. Victoria didn't react. I believed him, Renee added. For a while. I gave up everything, my job, my city, my dignity because I thought he meant it, and now I think he didn't even mean me, he just meant control. Victoria looked down at the table, then back up her voice, lower. I enabled it. I gave it structure. I wrapped it in legal documents and strategy meetings. and you're right to resent me for that." Renee's breath hitched. It was almost an apology. Almost. "But the board is shifting," Victoria went on. "Preston's gaining ground. The old guard is losing its grip. You've accelerated that faster than anyone expected, and whether you know it or not, you've made me start thinking about legacy differently." Renee tilted her head. "Yours, all of ours." There was a long pause before Victoria said, almost reluctantly, "If you're still interested in expanding Calder Ventures beyond Georgia, I have a proposal." Renee's eyebrows lifted. "You want to work with me now?" "No," Victoria said. "I want to stop working against you. That landed harder than it should have." "And why should I trust that you shouldn't?" Victoria replied. "But I'm tired of pretending the system we built still serves the future we claim to invest in." Renee studied her. For the first time, Victoria didn't look like a fortress. She looked tired. Human. "I'll consider it," Renee said finally. "Good." They didn't stay long. Neither ate. By the time they stepped outside into the warm night air, the tension between them had softened, not dissolved, but bent into something less sharp. At the curb, Renee turned. "One more thing," she said. Victoria waited. "I don't want your approval. I never did." Victoria nodded. "But you earned it anyway." They parted without shaking hands, without hugging. Just a nod. A recognition of something unspeakable passing between two women who had stood on opposite sides of the same fire. Later that night, Renee sat on her balcony barefoot and quiet, with Maisie asleep inside and her laptop open beside her. An email popped up. From Preston. Board vote passed. Derek's stepping down indefinitely. Victoria abstained. "We're starting over. Thought you'd want to know." She closed the laptop and looked out at the stars. And for the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was walking forward, on her own terms. The invitation arrived in a simple white envelope. No logo, no flourish, just her name handwritten in clean black ink. Renee turned it over twice before opening it. The paper inside was thick, formal. A gala hosted by the Charleston Women's Leadership Forum, honoring regional trailblazers in social enterprise and innovation. Her name was listed at the bottom of the honorees. She reread it. Twice. The last time her name had been read aloud in a Langford-owned ballroom, it had come with whispers, speculation, a silent footnote in a company that had once cut her out with surgical precision. And now, they were clapping. Elise burst into her office, out of breath. "Tell me you got it." Renee held up the card. 3 hours ago. Elise grinned, practically vibrating. "They're honoring you and Calder Ventures. You realize that means you'll be in the same room as Derek." Renee nodded slowly. "I figured." "And you're okay with that? I'm ready." That night after Maisie had fallen asleep, clutching her favorite plush rabbit, Renee sat in bed with her laptop open. The cursor blinked at the bottom of an email draft she'd started and abandoned more than once. It was addressed to Derek. Nothing dramatic. No fire, no fury. Just a few lines. She stared at it for a long time before closing the screen. Some things didn't need to be written. Some things only needed to be faced. The ballroom shimmered with soft golds and clean whites, orchids blooming across centerpieces, like they were born to be admired. Renee stepped inside in a midnight blue gown, simple strong lines that hugged her frame without begging for attention. Preston was the first to greet her. "You look like you own the place," he said, offering his arm. "I don't need to," she replied. "I just need to be remembered in it." Elise followed close behind, clipboard in hand, her earpiece barely visible. "You're seated 2 tables away from the Langford delegation." Derek RSVP'd but hasn't arrived yet. Noted, Renee said. As she made her way through the crowd, more than a few heads turned. Some greeted her with warmth, others with the polite tension that always follows a power shift. But no one ignored her. Halfway through dinner, the stage lights dimmed. The MC's voice filled the room announcing the final honoree, Renee Calder, for redefining how resilience, motherhood, and innovation can not only coexist, but thrive. Applause thundered through the space as Renee stood. She took a breath, smiled at Elise, then made her way to the stage. The podium felt taller than she remembered. She looked out across the sea of faces. Preston, Victoria, Elise, and then near the back, Derek. He wasn't leaning back. He wasn't smirking. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not diminished, just quieter. Renee inhaled. When I started Calder Ventures, I didn't know if anyone would believe in the kind of story I carried. A woman alone. A mother, not a victim, not a headline, just a person who refused to disappear. She paused, letting the silence gather around her like gravity. I was told once that if I had a child, I'd lose everything. But what I've learned is that becoming a mother didn't take something from me. It gave me clarity. It gave me fire. It gave me her. Her eyes softened. She's sitting backstage right now in a glittery dress she picked out herself, eating more chocolate than I said she could. The crowd laughed gently. But this isn't about revenge, or even recognition. It's about redefining what strength looks like. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's tired, sometimes it shows up in courtrooms and boardrooms, and sometimes it shows up in bedtime stories and science fair projects and whispered prayers that no one else hears. A breath. So if you remember anything about me tonight, let it be this: you can rebuild your life on the very pieces someone tried to break. And you can do it with grace, with grit, and with your head held high. The applause this time didn't feel like approval. It felt like arrival. When she stepped down from the stage, Maisie was waiting in Elise's arms, a glittery tiara askew on her curls. You were amazing. Mama Renee scooped her into a hug, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. I did it for you. Maisie grinned. I know. As the night wound down, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned. Derek, older, tired, but steady. Congratulations, he said simply. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, You did more than I ever thought possible. That's because you only ever saw part of me. A pause. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She nodded. I don't need that. But I won't stop you from saying it. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. And that was enough. As she walked out of the ballroom into the humid Charleston night, Maisie asleep against her shoulder, Renee felt the weight lift. Not because it was over, but because she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. She had become the woman she once needed. And that woman was unstoppable. The late morning light poured across the open windows of Renee's home office, warming the hardwood floors and painting quiet patterns over the papers spread across her desk. It had been a week since the gala, a week since the applause, since Derek's unexpected apology, since the moment she realized closure didn't come with fireworks, it came with peace. Maisie was off at school. Elise was handling a site visit in Atlanta, and Renee was alone with her coffee and a folder of proposals from 3 major cities interested in hosting the next Calder Summit. Boston, Austin, Detroit. Each proposal was crisp, strategic, but none of them moved her, until her phone rang. Everett. She smiled instinctively and answered. Shouldn't you be in a meeting? She teased. I am, he replied. I'm on the roof of my building with a sandwich and a view. That counts, doesn't it? She laughed softly. Sounds more productive than what I'm doing. And what are you doing trying to feel inspired by a stack of very uninspiring paperwork? Well, he said I might have a solution for that. She leaned back in her chair. Oh, there's a community initiative in New Orleans looking for partners. A startup school for single parents run by a woman who reminds me a lot of you, tenacious, principled, impossible to intimidate. Renee raised an eyebrow. Is this a business call? Or a soft invitation to get me out of Charleston for a weekend? Can it be both? She paused, then smiled. Send me the details. I already did. Of course he had. As they talked, the familiar rhythm of their connection settled in. No need to explain history, no need to soften ambition. It was the kind of rapport that only came from surviving something together and choosing to stay. Before they hung up, Everett added, I know you say you're not looking for anything permanent. I'm not, she said gently. But if you ever are, he continued, you should know I'm not going anywhere. Renee didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly, that might be the most dangerous thing anyone said to me in years. He chuckled. I'll take that as a maybe. After the call ended, she stared out the window for a while. The city moved below her slow, steady, unconcerned with her uncertainty. She wasn't afraid of love. Not anymore. But she was careful with it. Protective. Not because of what had happened with Derek, but because of what she'd built since. Maisie was growing up. The foundation was thriving. Her voice carried weight now in rooms that once dismissed her completely. She didn't want to lose that balance, but she didn't want to close the door on something real either. That evening, she picked Maisie up from school and took her to the pier. The sun was beginning its descent, casting the water in soft gold. They walked hand in hand as boats hummed in the distance. Mama, yeah, baby, did you like being on the stage last week? Renee smiled. I did. You looked nervous. I was. Maisie swung her hand. But you looked pretty. And brave. Renee stopped and knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. You make me brave. Maisie's nose crinkled. You were brave before me, maybe Renee said. But I didn't know it until you came along. They sat on a bench, watching the water. Maisie rested her head on her mother's shoulder. After a while, she whispered, Is Everett your boyfriend? Renee nearly choked on her laugh. Where did that come from? Maisie shrugged. He likes you. He listens to you. He always brings me snacks. That last one's important, Renee teased. Maisie nodded seriously. Renee took a long breath. He's someone I care about. A lot. But love is something you grow carefully. You water it. You make sure it's in the right soil, and sometimes you wait. Maisie looked thoughtful. Do you think he's the right soil? Renee stared out at the water, then kissed the top of her daughter's head. I think he might be. That night after dinner, Renee opened Everett's email. She read the New Orleans proposal twice, then began drafting a response. She paused mid-sentence, then opened a new message. You asked if I was ever going to be ready. I don't have that answer tonight. But I do know this, I'm not afraid of the question anymore. She hovered over the send button heart, skipping once, then clicked. Closure wasn't the end of the story. Sometimes it was just the start of something deeper, something slower, something real. And for the first time in a long time, Renee wasn't just building a future. She was imagining one. The flight to New Orleans touched down just after noon on a Thursday, and the heat met Renee like an old rival, thick, warm, heavy with history. The kind of air that carried memories whether you wanted them or not. She stepped off the plane in a linen jumpsuit, sunglasses perched on her head, and a tote bag that held both her business proposal and the photo Maisie had drawn of her mama making the world better. It wasn't just another site visit. Everett was already waiting outside baggage claim, leaning against a silver rental SUV, sunglasses on arms folded. The minute she spotted him, He grinned like the sun had shifted slightly in his favor. "You came," he said, opening the passenger door. "You sent me chocolate croissants from a cafe I've never heard of as a bribe," she replied, sliding into the seat. "Worked, didn't it?" she smirked. "Don't get smug. I haven't signed anything yet." "But you got on the plane," he said, shutting her door gently. "That's progress." The city greeted them with a rhythm all its own. Street musicians on corners, beads caught in tree branches, buildings with peeling paint that somehow looked dignified, like they'd lived lives they weren't ready to leave behind. The startup school was tucked into an old church converted into a community center. Kids' laughter spilled from the courtyard. Banners with quotes about resilience and learning fluttered in the breeze. Inside the founder, Carla greeted them with a warmth that reminded Renee of her mother's best days, firm hugs, no apologies. "I've heard a lot about you," Carla said, shaking her hand. "I hope mostly good, only the kind of good that comes with earned respect." They toured the classrooms, met parents in the library-turned-lounge, and sat in on a financial literacy session where a young mother stood in front of the group and said, "I want to learn how to give my son options I never had." Renee felt the words like a quiet bell ringing in her chest. Afterward, Carla pulled her aside. "We don't need saving," she said plainly. "We need scaling, and we need a partner who's not afraid of the mess that comes with real lives." Renee nodded slowly. "That's the only kind of work I know how to do." They spent the rest of the afternoon mapping out numbers, possibilities, expansion goals. By the time they left, Renee's tote bag held a manila folder full of hand-drawn ideas and raw passion disguised as planning. Back at the hotel, she dropped her bag, kicked off her heels, and sank onto the edge of the bed. Everett knocked once, then let himself in, holding 2 cups of sweet tea. "I figured you might need this," he said, handing her one. "Is it spiked?" He gave her a look. "Do you want it to be tempting?" She took a long sip, letting the sugar and citrus settle her nerves. They sat in silence for a few moments, the kind that stretched comfortably between people who didn't feel the need to fill it. Then Everett spoke, voice low. "You were different today." She looked over at him. Different how more grounded. Less guarded. Renee didn't answer right away. She stared out the window, the city lights just beginning to blink awake. "I felt like I belonged," she said softly. "Not because of what I've built, but because these women reminded me of where I started." He nodded. "I like that version of you," he said. Her brow lifted. "And what version do you see when I'm not here?" "The one who forgets she's allowed to rest," he replied. "The one who still holds her breath when someone praises her like she's waiting for them to take it back." That made her eyes sting. She looked down at her cup, the ice melting slowly inside it. "Sometimes I think I became successful, just so no one could dismiss me again." Everett leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You didn't become successful," he said gently. "You became undeniable." She met his eyes. "I don't know how to let anyone into that." "You don't have to know," he said. "You just have to want to." There was a pause, a shift in the air between them. Then Renee whispered, "Stay." Everett didn't ask her to explain. He just nodded, once took the cup from her hand, and moved to the other side of the bed, sitting beside her in the warm quiet. Later that night, they didn't talk about plans or strategy. They didn't talk about Maisie or Langford or Atlanta or Charleston. They watched a movie with the sound off, laughed quietly at the expressions, and let their shoulders touch like the world outside had nothing else to demand of them. Before she fell asleep, Renee murmured, "I don't want a rescue." Everett replied, "Good. I was never planning to offer one." She smiled. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a declaration, but it was real. And that was enough. Spring came slowly to Charleston, the way it always did, soft golden like the city was waking up from a long dream it didn't quite want to end. The azaleas were blooming again, wrapping the iron gates of the historic district in wild color, and the marsh grass was turning from brown to green, just like it had every year since Renee arrived back, with nothing but a duffel, a child, and a heart full of silence. But this spring felt different. This time she was building something. The ribbon cutting for Calder South was set for Saturday morning. What had started as a rough pitch in a New Orleans community center was now a fully funded initiative spanning 3 southern states. Childcare integrated into business incubators, mental health support wrapped into entrepreneurship training, real support for real lives. And in the center of it all, her. Renee stood in the middle of the courtyard, with Elise checking last-minute logistics. Volunteers bustled behind them, arranging chairs, testing microphones, tying soft white balloons to the fence. "You sure you want to do your speech outside?" Elise asked, squinting up at the sky. "Oh, forecast says it could rain." "If it rains, it rains," Renee replied, her tone calm. "We'll be fine. You weren't always this chill, you know," Elise teased. "I wasn't always this whole." Elise paused, watching her for a beat. "I'm proud of you," she said. Renee looked over her, smile, quiet but full. "Thanks. I think I'm finally proud of me too." The next morning people started arriving an hour before the event. Old neighbors, new friends, reporters, a few of the board members from Langford who had jumped ship and backed her foundation when no one else would. Even Victoria sent flowers, hydrangeas. No note, just the gesture. Maisie stood next to her mother in a yellow dress with sunflowers printed across the hem. She held a tiny pair of scissors in one hand and a job in the other. "You'll do the ribbon with me?" Renee asked. Maisie nodded solemnly. "I practiced with my stuffed animals." "That's very official. You think I'll be okay?" Renee knelt down, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "I think you were made for this." As the crowd quieted, Renee stepped forward, a breeze catching her hair just enough to remind her to stay present. She took a breath and looked out at the faces that had come to witness not just the launch of a building but the story that made it possible. "I used to think that rebuilding meant starting over," she said. "But I've learned that sometimes it means honoring every broken piece and choosing to keep going anyway." She looked down at Maisie, who smiled up at her eyes shining. This space, this dream was born out of fear, yes. But more than that, it was born out of the belief that love can make you brave. That motherhood is not a detour from greatness, but the root of it. The crowd listened, still and attentive. Years ago, I left this city believing I had no place in it. Today, I return not to reclaim it, but to build something new in its heart. There was a pause. Then she added her voice, steady. "If you're standing in this courtyard and wondering if your story is too messy, too broken, too late, I promise you it's not. You are not. You're just getting started." The applause swelled, rising and echoing off the old brick walls. Renee looked out and saw Everett standing near the back hands tucked in his pockets. He gave her a small nod. Not asking for anything. Just there. Just steady. Like always. She smiled back. After the ceremony, after the photos and handshakes and the soft buzz of small talk, she found a quiet moment by the oak tree at the far end of the lot. Maisie was dancing on the lawn with other kids, her yellow dress glowing in the sunlight. Everett approached quietly, holding 2 lemonades. "One for the empire builder," he said, handing her a cup. She took it with a grateful sigh. "Feels more like a village than an empire." He grinned. "That's exactly why it works." They stood in the shade, watching the life they'd helped grow. "You remember what you told me back in New Orleans?" she asked. "Which part that you weren't offering a rescue?" He nodded. "I think I finally believe that, I never needed you to believe it, he said. I just needed you to trust yourself enough to stop building walls. I didn't build a wall, she replied, glancing around the courtyard. I built doors, and I opened them. He looked at her quiet for a moment, then said, You ready for what? He shrugged. Whatever's next. She took a sip of her lemonade, letting the sweetness settle. I'm not rushing to define it, she said. But I'm not running from it either. He offered his hand. She didn't hesitate. They walked across the grass toward Maisie, who shrieked with laughter as the kids chased bubbles floating through the air. Renee stood there for a long while, letting the sun kiss her shoulders, letting the moment settle into her bones. She had once been told that if she had that baby, her life would be over. But her daughter didn't end her story. She started it. And now, years later, standing in the middle of a life she built herself, Renee knew the truth. The most powerful kind of justice isn't revenge, it's joy. And she had finally claimed hers,